I was digging through a frozen dumpster behind a five-star restaurant when a woman in a Rolls-Royce pulled up and rolled down her window. I froze, holding a half-eaten bagel, expecting her to call the police or yell at me to get a job. Instead, she looked at my dirty face and asked, "Excuse me, are you Aaliyah?" When I nodded, ashamed of my smell and my rags, she didn't look away. She smiled and said, "Your great-uncle in New York just died. He left you his mansion, his Ferrari, and his $47 million estate. But there is one condition." What she said next changed everything. "My name is Aaliyah, and 3 days ago I was the wife of a real estate mogul. Today I am homeless. But tomorrow I will own the pavement my ex-husband walks on. Before I tell you how I destroyed the people who ruined me, hit like and subscribe if you have ever been kicked when you were down." The sound of the judge's gavel hitting the wood sounded like a gunshot that ended my life. I sat in the cold leather chair of the Manhattan family court, my hands trembling under the table. The judge, a stern man who looked like he had not smiled in a decade, adjusted his glasses and looked down at me with pity. "Based on the evidence presented regarding Clause 4B of the prenuptial agreement, specifically the section on fiscal irresponsibility, the court rules in favor of Mr. Tyrell Brooks. All assets, including the marital home and joint accounts, will remain with Mr. Brooks to cover the outstanding business debts incurred under Mrs. Brooks's name." My ears rang. Debts? What debts? I turned to look at Tyrell. He was sitting next to his $500 an hour shark of a lawyer wearing a custom navy suit that I had picked out for him. He refused to make eye contact with me, focused entirely on checking his Rolex. I stood up, my legs feeling like jelly. "Tyrell." I whispered loud enough for only him to hear. "You know I never signed those loan documents. You told me those were insurance papers for the new development." Tyrell finally looked at me. His eyes were dead void of the love he had promised me 5 years ago at the altar. "It is legal, Aaliyah. You signed it. You really should have read the fine print instead of trusting me blindly. Business is business." I wanted to scream, to claw that smug look off his face, but the bailiff was already moving toward me. I had been played. My husband, the man I supported when he was flipping burgers and dreaming of real estate, had used my credit score to leverage risky loans, defaulted on them, and then structured our divorce so that I took the fall for his failures while he kept the profits. "Ms. Brooks," the judge said, his voice impatient, "you are dismissed. Please vacate the courtroom." I walked out of those double doors with nothing but the clothes on my back. My coat, my purse, my phone, everything was in Tyrell's car. I stepped into the hallway expecting to see Tyrell waiting to at least give me a ride to a hotel or perhaps give me enough cash for a cab. Instead, I saw her, Caroline. My sister-in-law leaned against a marble pillar, looking impeccable in a white cashmere coat that cost more than my college tuition. She was the one who introduced me to Tyrell. She was the one who smiled to my face at Thanksgiving while whispering to the family that I was just a gold digger from the projects. She held a black plastic trash bag in one hand and a small battered suitcase in the other. "Well, look who it is," Caroline said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "The single lady." "Where is Tyrell?" I asked, my voice cracking. "I need my things, Caroline. My winter coat is in the trunk." "Oh, about that." Caroline dropped the suitcase at my feet. It made a hollow thud. "We packed your essentials. Tyrell is worried that if you take the designer clothes you might sell them and get yourself into more debt. Those remain company property. You understand, right?" I stared at the small suitcase. It was an old carry-on I used in college. "Caroline, it is 10 degrees outside. You cannot be serious." She stepped closer, her perfume overpowering the stale air of the courthouse. "Listen to me, Aaliyah. You never belonged with us. You were a diversity hire in this family. Tyrell is a rising star, and he needs a wife who comes from a pedigree, not someone who thinks Red Lobster is fine dining. Do yourself a favor. Go back to whatever gutter you crawled out of." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a single $20 bill. She tucked it into the pocket of my blazer, patting my chest condescendingly. Here, buy yourself a hot meal. Consider it a severance package. She turned on her heel, the click-clack of her heels echoing like gunfire as she walked away. I stood alone in the hallway, the humiliation burning my skin hotter than fire. I grabbed the suitcase handle. It was light, too light. I unzipped it right there in the lobby. Empty. It was completely empty. They had not even packed my underwear. They stripped me of everything, just for the sport of it. I walked out the front doors of the courthouse and the New York winter hit me like a physical blow. The wind cut through my thin blazer, biting into my skin. Snowflakes swirled around me, landing on my eyelashes. I stood on the concrete steps, shivering violently, clutching an empty suitcase and a $20 bill, realizing that the man I loved had not just divorced me. He had executed me. The sun began to set, casting long gray shadows over the city. I needed shelter. I needed help. I walked 3 blocks to a payphone, my fingers numb as I fed quarters into the slot. I dialed my best friend Jasmine. We had been friends since high school. Surely she would let me crash on her couch. The line rang once, then went straight to voicemail. I called again. Straight to voicemail. I dialed Marcus Tyrell's cousin, who always said I was like a sister to him. Blocked. I dialed my college roommate Sarah. Blocked. I slowly hung up the phone. Tyrell had been thorough. He had not just taken my money, he had taken my reputation. He probably told them I was on drugs, or that I had stolen from him. He controlled the narrative, and in their world, you do not side with the broke ex-wife against the rising millionaire. The temperature dropped as night fell. My stomach twisted with hunger. I found a 24-hour bodega on 8th Avenue. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as I walked down the aisle, trying to look normal despite my shivering. I grabbed a loaf of cheap white bread and a bottle of water. I walked to the counter, placing the items down. I reached for the emergency credit card I kept hidden in my bra lining. It was a joint account card, but I prayed Tyrell had forgotten to cancel it. The clerk, a bored teenager with headphones around his neck, swiped the card. Beep. Declined. He looked at me, popping his gum. Try again, I pleaded. Please. It must be a mistake. He swiped it again. Beep. Declined. Lady, it says card reported stolen. You have cash or not? I reached for the $20 bill Caroline had given me, but as I patted my pocket, my heart stopped. It was gone. It must have fallen out when I was walking against the wind, or maybe I dropped it at the payphone. I checked every pocket. Nothing. I don't have it, I whispered, tears finally spilling over. Then get out, the clerk said, pointing to the door. No loitering. I walked back out into the freezing night. My hunger was a sharp pain now gnawing at my ribs. I walked toward the subway station, hoping to find a warm corner to sit in. The stairs down to the platform smelled of urine and bleach. I found a spot near the turnstiles, huddled against the tiled wall, pulling my knees to my chest. I closed my eyes, trying to disappear. Suddenly, I felt a tug. I snapped my eyes open. A group of teenagers in hoodies were running up the stairs, laughing. One of them was holding my empty suitcase. Hey! I screamed, scrambling up. Give that back! They didn't even look back. They just laughed, their voices echoing off the concrete walls. It was empty, but it was the only thing I had. It was the only proof I existed. I sank back down to the cold floor, burying my face in my hands, sobbing so hard my chest ached. Here. A rough, gravelly voice made me look up. Standing in front of me was an old man. His beard was matted and gray, his coat held together by duct tape, and he wore mismatched shoes. He smelled like old newspapers and whiskey. He held out half a sandwich wrapped in foil. It was smashed and looked days old. You look like you need it more than me, he said. I hesitated. My pride screamed at me not to take food from a homeless man. But my survival instinct screamed louder. I took the foil with shaking hands. Thank you, I whispered. He sat down next to me, not too close, just close enough to block the draft from the tunnel. I am Joe, he said. They call me Crazy Joe because I talk to the pigeons. But the pigeons listen better than people. I am Aaliyah, I said, taking a bite of the sandwich. It tasted like cardboard and mayo, but it was the best thing I had ever eaten. You are new here, Joe said. I can tell. You still have that look in your eyes. Ideally, you want to cry, but you are too tired. My husband took everything I said, the words spilling out to this stranger. He left me with nothing. Not even a coat. Joe chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. The rich ones are the worst. They steal with a pen, not a gun. But the wheel turns, girl. The wheel always turns. We sat in silence for a while. I finished the sandwich and felt a tiny spark of warmth in my belly. I looked up at the wall across the tracks. There was a massive billboard illuminated by bright LED lights. My breath caught in my throat. It was Tyrell. His face was 20 feet tall, smiling that charming, lying smile. The text next to his head read, Brooks Real Estate, building the future of New York. Integrity, vision, family. He was looking down at me even here. In the bowels of the city, eating trash with a stranger, I couldn't escape him. He was the king of the city, and I was a ghost. I looked at Tyrell's giant face, and then I looked at Crazy Joe, wiping crumbs from his beard. Something inside me snapped. It wasn't despair anymore. It was rage, cold, hard rage. I will take it all back, I whispered to the empty tunnel. Joe looked at me, his cloudy eyes suddenly sharp. What did you say? I said I am going to take it all back. I said, my voice stronger. Every penny, every brick, every lie. Joe smiled, revealing missing teeth. That is the spirit, Aaliyah. But first you need to survive the night. Tuck your shoes under your legs or someone will steal them while you sleep. Welcome to the bottom. I pulled my knees tighter, staring at Tyrell's billboard until my eyes burned. I didn't know how, and I didn't know when, but I swore on the cold concrete floor of that subway station that Tyrell Brooks would regret the day he didn't check that suitcase to make sure I was really dead inside. Because as long as I was breathing, I was coming for him. 30 days is all it takes to erase a person. 30 days ago, I was Mrs. Brooks dining inside Le Cuckoo with a glass of vintage Pinot Noir in my hand, complaining that the lobster bisque was slightly cold. Now I was standing behind that same restaurant, shivering in a coat I found in a donation bin 3 weeks ago, fighting the urge to vomit as the smell of rotting fish mixed with the heavenly aroma of freshly baked bread. Hunger is a monster that lives inside you. It starts as a growl, then it becomes a sharp pain, and eventually it turns into a hollow, aching void that consumes your every thought. My hands, once manicured and soft, were now cracked and bleeding from the dry winter air. Dirt was permanently etched under my fingernails. I looked at the heavy steel door of the restaurant's rear exit. I knew exactly what time the kitchen staff threw out the unsold bread. It was 11:30 at night. I was 5 minutes early. I crouched behind a stack of blue recycling bins, trying to shield myself from the biting wind. The alleyway was dark, illuminated only by a flickering yellow street lamp that buzzed like an angry insect. I rubbed my arms, trying to generate friction, trying to remember what warmth felt like. My stomach cramped violently. I had not eaten in 2 days, save for half an apple I found near a park bench. I needed that bread. I needed it to survive the night. Suddenly the heavy steel door hissed open. A beam of warm golden light spilled into the filthy alley, cutting through the darkness. I froze, shrinking back into the shadows. Usually it was just a busboy dumping trash bags, but this time I heard voices. Expensive voices. Watch your step, darling, a deep, familiar baritone echoed off the brick walls. My heart stopped. I would know that voice anywhere. It was the voice that whispered vows to me 5 years ago. It was the voice that promised to protect me. Tyrell. I pressed myself flat against the cold brick, praying they would just walk to the waiting limousine and leave. But then I heard the click-clack of stilettos on the pavement. Ugh, Tyrell, why did we have to exit through the back? A woman's voice complained. It smells like dead rats out here. This is assault on my senses. Caroline! Of course. Tyrell laughed a nervous, appeasing sound. The paparazzi are swarming the front entrance, Caro. You know we have to keep the merger quiet until next week. Just hold your breath for 10 seconds. The car is right there. I peeked around the edge of the bin. There they were. Tyrell looked magnificent in a charcoal gray wool coat, his breath misting in the air. He looked healthy, well-fed, glowing with the success stolen from my life. And beside him, clinging to his arm like a parasite in silk, was Caroline. She was wearing a white fur stole wrapped around a shimmering silver dress. She looked like an ice queen, pristine and untouchable. I should have stayed hidden. I should have let them pass. But as Tyrell adjusted his scarf, something fell from his pocket. A leather glove. It dropped silently onto the wet asphalt. Without thinking, driven by some stupid ingrained instinct to be helpful, I stepped out from the shadows. You dropped your glove, I croaked. My voice was raspy from disuse and dehydration. Both of them spun around. Tyrell flinched, stepping back, as if a wild animal had lunged at him. Caroline let out a sharp shriek, covering her nose with a gloved hand. "Oh my God, get away from us!" Caroline yelled, her eyes wide with disgust. I froze, realizing my mistake. I was not Aaliyah the wife anymore. I was a dark shape in the night. I was the dirt they tried to scrub off their shoes. Tyrell stared at me. He squinted, trying to make sense of the figure before him. The light from the open door caught my face. I saw the recognition hit him like a physical slap. His jaw dropped. "Aaliyah," he whispered. The name hung in the freezing air between us. Caroline stopped pretending to gag and leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. She looked me up and down, taking in my matted hair, my oversized stained coat, and my trembling hands. A slow, cruel smile spread across her face. It was not a smile of pity. It was a smile of victory. "Well, look at this." Caroline laughed a sharp, brittle sound. "Tyrell, look. It is your ex-wife. I told you she would not last a month in the real world. Look at her. She is digging in the trash behind the very place she used to act like she owned." Tyrell looked sick. He looked from me to the dumpster, then back to me. His hand twitched. He reached into his coat pocket. I knew that movement. He was reaching for his money clip. For a second, just a split second, I saw a flicker of humanity in his eyes. He took a step toward me. "Aaliyah, he stammered, pulling out a crisp $100 bill. "Do not you dare," Caroline hissed. Her hand shot out and grabbed Tyrell's wrist. Her nails dug into his expensive coat. "Do not give her a cent, Tyrell. She is starving, Caroline." Tyrell said, his voice weak. "Look at her. She is starving because she is useless." Caroline spat, not breaking eye contact with me. "If you feed her, she will just keep coming back. She is like a stray cat. You have to let her hit rock bottom or she will never learn. Put the money away." Tyrell hesitated. He looked at the money in his hand, then at me. I stood there stripped of all dignity, staring at the man who vowed to love me for richer or for poorer. I did not beg. I could not beg. I just watched him. And then he slowly put the money back into his pocket. He looked away, unable to meet my gaze. "I am sorry, Aaliyah," he mumbled. "Caroline is right. You need to pull yourself up." The betrayal cut deeper than the cold. But Caroline was not done. She wanted blood. She turned toward the open door where the restaurant manager was standing, watching the scene with wide eyes. "Excuse me," Caroline shouted, her voice echoing in the alley. "Manager." "Yes, you. Why do you allow vagrants to harass your VIP guests in the loading dock?" The manager, a short man in a tight suit, ran over looking terrified. "I am so sorry, Ms. Vance. I did not see her." "This is unacceptable," Caroline shrieked, pointing a manicured finger at me. My brother-in-law and I just spent $2,000 on dinner, and we come out here to be accosted by trash. I feel unsafe. Do you want me to write a review about how Le Cuckoo endangers its high-net-worth clients? Do you want me to tell my friends that this place is a homeless shelter? No, please, Ms. Vance, the manager stammered, sweating despite the freezing temperature. We will handle it immediately. Hey, security, get out here, now. Two massive security guards in black jackets burst out of the door. They looked at the manager, then at Caroline, and finally at me. Get her out of here, the manager ordered, pointing at me as if I were a diseased rat. Make sure she never comes back. Wait, I tried to say, raising my hands. I am leaving. You do not have to touch me. But they did not listen. They wanted to impress the woman in the silver dress. One of the guards grabbed my arm. His grip was like a vice crushing my bruise. He did not escort me. He dragged me. Let go of me, I screamed, stumbling as he yanked me toward the street. I saw Caroline watching, a smirk playing on her red lips. Tyrell was studying his shoes, pretending he was anywhere else. The guard dragged me to the edge of the alley, where the pavement met the main road. With a grunt of effort, he shoved me forward. Stay out, trash, he growled. I stumbled. My worn-out boots slipped on a patch of black ice. I flailed, trying to catch my balance, but it was too late. I fell hard. My hands skinned against the rough asphalt, and my body landed with a splash into a large, freezing puddle of dirty slush and motor oil. The icy water soaked through my thin pants, instantly sending a shock of pain up my legs. I gasped, struggling to push myself up, dripping with filth. I sat there in the mud, shivering uncontrollably. From the warmth of the alley entrance, I heard Caroline's laugh. It was light and airy, the sound of someone who had never known a day of true suffering. Come on, Tyrell, she said, loud enough for me to hear. Let us go. I need to sanitize my coat. Just being near her made me feel dirty. I watched through tears of rage as they climbed into the waiting black limousine. The heavy door slammed shut, sealing them in their world of warmth and privilege. The car pulled away, splashing more dirty water onto my face as it sped off into the night. I sat alone in the gutter behind the five-star restaurant. My hands were bleeding. My clothes were soaked. I was hungry, cold, and utterly broken. I looked up at the sky, but there were no stars, only the suffocating orange glow of the city lights. I thought I had no tears left, but a single hot tear rolled down my cheek, mixing with the grime. They thought this was the end of me. They thought they had flushed me down the drain. But as I clenched my fist, feeling the grit of the pavement bite into my palm, I made a promise to the darkness. I would not die here. I would not let this be the last chapter. If I had to crawl through hell to get back to them, I would. And when I did, I would not just bring a lawsuit. I would bring an apocalypse. The taillights of Tyrell's limousine disappeared around the corner, leaving me in total darkness. I lay in that puddle of freezing slush until my legs went numb. The water had soaked through my jeans and into my boots, turning my toes into blocks of ice. I tried to stand, but my body refused to obey. I was shaking so violently that my teeth chattered a hollow skeletal sound in the empty street. This was it. This was how Aaliyah Brooks ended. Not with a bang, but freezing to death behind a kitchen where she once ordered truffles shaved over her pasta. I closed my eyes, letting the snow settle on my eyelashes. I wondered if anyone would even claim my body, or if the city would just bury me in a pauper's grave as a Jane Doe. Then the light returned. It started as a soft glow against my closed eyelids, then grew brighter, warmer. I heard the crunch of tires on snow. Not the aggressive roar of a taxi or a truck, but the silent, powerful glide of an engine that cost more than most houses. I cracked one eye open. A car had pulled up to the curb just inches from where I lay in the gutter. It was massive. A Rolls-Royce Phantom painted a midnight blue so deep it looked black. The iconic Spirit of Ecstasy hood ornament gleamed under the street lamp, staring down at me like a silver angel. I flinched, expecting another insult. Maybe Tyrell had come back to spit on me one last time. Maybe Caroline wanted to take a picture for her Instagram. The rear door opened. A woman stepped out. She did not look like Caroline. She did not look like anyone from Tyrell's flashy plastic world. She was older, perhaps 60, with silver hair cut into a sharp, terrifyingly precise bob. She wore a long charcoal wool coat and held a black umbrella that she snapped open with a decisive click. She did not look at the mud on her boots. She looked directly at me. "Excuse me," she said. Her voice was calm, authoritative, and cut through the wind like a knife. "Are you Aaliyah?" I tried to speak, but my throat was frozen shut. I managed a weak, pathetic nod. I expected her to hand me a few dollars. I expected pity. Instead, she did something that made my breath catch. She knelt down. Right there in the slush. She ruined the hem of her expensive coat without blinking an eye. She reached out a gloved hand not to push me away but to touch my shoulder. "I am Evelyn Sterling," she said. "I was the personal attorney for Mr. Otis Vance." The name took a moment to register through the fog of hypothermia in my brain. Otis. Uncle Otis. My great-uncle. The image of him floated into my mind. He was a scruffy old man who always wore the same tweed jacket with elbow patches. He lived in a small apartment in Queens and smelled like pipe tobacco. Tyrell used to laugh at him. At our wedding, Tyrell had banned Otis from the VIP section, calling him a crazy old coot who would embarrass us. Otis had just smiled, eaten his cake in the back, and winked at me. Otis the First rasped my voice barely a whisper. "Is he okay?" Evelyn's face softened just a fraction. "I am afraid Mr. Vance passed away 3 days ago, Aaliyah. I have been looking for you ever since. Tyrell told me you were on a vacation in the Maldives. I had to hire a private investigator to track your location to this alley." Dead. Uncle Otis was dead. The only person in my family who never asked me for money. The only one who just wanted to play chess and tell stories. Tears, hot and stinging, welled up in my eyes again. "I am sorry," I sobbed, my head dropping. "I have nothing. I cannot even afford a funeral. Look at me. I am trash." Evelyn stood up. She signaled to the driver, a mountain of a man who immediately rushed over. "You are not trash," Evelyn said firmly. "You are the sole beneficiary of the Vance estate. Now get in the car before you freeze to death. We have business to discuss." The driver lifted me as if I weighed nothing. He placed me gently onto the cream-colored leather of the back seat. The warmth hit me instantly. The air inside smelled of lavender and expensive parchment. Evelyn climbed in beside me and closed the door, shutting out the wind, the smell of the dumpster, and the cruelty of the world outside. She opened a compartment and poured a steaming liquid from a silver thermos into a crystal cup. "Drink," she ordered. "It is hot broth with a dash of brandy. It will wake up your blood." I drank. The heat spread through my chest, painful but glorious. I looked at Evelyn, who was wiping a smudge of dirt from her coat with a silk handkerchief. "I do not understand," I said, my hands shaking around the cup. "Uncle Otis he was a retired music teacher. He lived on a pension. Why would you be looking for me? Did he leave me his record collection?" Evelyn stopped wiping her coat. She turned to look at me, her eyes dark and intelligent. "Aaliyah, your family is, how do I put this politely, blind. They see only what is on the surface. They saw an old man in a tweed jacket and dismissed him. They did not know that Otis Vance was the silent founder of Crown Holdings." I choked on the broth. Crown Holdings. The massive conglomerate that owned half the skyline of Manhattan. The company Tyrell had been trying to get a meeting with for 5 years. He had posters of their buildings in his office. "Crown Holdings," I repeated, shaking my head. "No, that is impossible." Otis clipped coupons. He complained about the price of milk. "That was his test," Evelyn said, a small smile playing on her lips. "Otis despised greed. He hated the way people changed when they smelled money, so he hid it. He built an empire from the shadows while watching his family to see who truly loved him and who just loved his wallet. He saw how Tyrell treated him. He saw how your parents ignored him. And he saw you." She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a thick document bound in blue velvet. He saw how you visited him every Sunday even when you were busy. He saw how you listened to his stories. He saw that you were the only one who treated him like a human being, not an ATM. She opened the document. The paper was thick and heavy. He passed away peacefully in his sleep. Evelyn continued softly. And he left everything to you, everything I whispered. The mansion in the Hamptons, the penthouse on Park Avenue, the vintage Ferrari collection, and the majority voting stock in Crown Holdings. She pointed to a figure at the bottom of the page. My eyes widened. I blinked, sure that the hypothermia was making me hallucinate. $47 million in liquid assets available to you immediately, Evelyn stated as if she were reading a grocery list. And an estimated portfolio value of $300 million more. The cup slipped from my hand and spilled onto the floor mat. $47 million. An hour ago I was begging for a bagel. An hour ago I was pushed into a puddle by a security guard earning minimum wage. This is a joke, I stammered. Tyrell put you up to this. Is this a reality show? Are there cameras? It is very real, Ms. Brooks, Evelyn said. Or should I say Ms. Vance? You are now one of the most powerful women in New York City. You could buy the restaurant that just threw you out and turn it into a parking lot by tomorrow morning if you wished. I stared at the leather-bound document in my lap, the number 47 million burning into my retinas. It was freedom. It was power. It was the sledgehammer I needed to smash Tyrell's life into dust. But Evelyn was watching me, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Tell me, I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline. What did Uncle Otis want me to do? Did he want me to scatter his ashes on Everest? Evelyn took a sip of her brandy. Otis did not want to just hand you a fortune. He believed that unearned wealth destroys the weak. He wanted to make sure that the person who inherits his empire sees the truth. The naked, ugly truth of the people around them. So here is the condition, she continued. You must reside in the Vance estate in the Hamptons for the next 90 days. The summer season is starting. The estate is the crown jewel of the area, and everyone knows the owner has passed. They know there is an heir, but they do not know it is you. The identity of the beneficiary is sealed by the court until September 1st. I nodded slowly. Okay. I have to live in a mansion for 3 months. That does not sound like a punishment, Evelyn. You did not let me finish. Evelyn said, raising a finger. You will live there, but not as the mistress of the house. You will live there as the help. I blinked. Excuse me. The position of head housekeeper is currently vacant, Evelyn stated calmly. You will take that position. You will wear the uniform. You will scrub the floors. You will polish the silver. You will serve the guests who come to visit. You will be invisible. My jaw tightened. You want me to go from being a homeless divorcee to a maid. Why? Because Tyrell and Caroline have rented the villa directly next door, Evelyn revealed, dropping the bomb casually. They spent a fortune to secure the rental. Their goal is to befriend the new heir of the Vance estate. They want to pitch a merger. They want to charm their way into the fortune. They will be spending a lot of time at your gates trying to get inside. I felt a cold smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. They want to meet the owner, exactly, Evelyn said. Evelyn. And they will meet her. They just will not recognize her. Otis wanted you to see them when they think no one important is watching. People treat peers with respect, Aaliyah, but they treat the help like furniture. He wanted you to see exactly who they are when the masks come off. If you can survive 3 months of serving them, of enduring their arrogance without breaking your cover, the estate is yours. But if you reveal your identity even once, if you tell a single soul who you really are before the deadline, the entire estate is liquidated and donated to a cat sanctuary in New Jersey. You will be left with nothing. The car went silent. I looked down at my hands. They were still dirty from the alley. I thought about the humiliation of the last month. I thought about Tyrell letting the security guard throw me in the mud. He saw me as trash. Now I had the chance to be the fly on the wall while he dug his own grave. It was a cruel test. It was a test of patience, of pride, and of acting. But as I imagined pouring coffee for Caroline while she bragged about money that was actually mine, a dark satisfaction bloomed in my chest. It was the ultimate power move, to hold the keys to their destruction in my pocket while I cleaned their dishes. "I will do it," I said. Evelyn nodded, satisfied. "Good. But we cannot have you looking like Aaliyah Brooks, the discarded wife. We need to create a new person. Aaliyah Brooks is dead. Long live the housekeeper." The car turned smoothly, heading away from the slums and toward the high-end district. We stopped in front of a private, unmarked salon that catered to celebrities who wanted to avoid the paparazzi. Evelyn handed me a black credit card. "Fix it," she said. "Make yourself unrecognizable." I sat in the salon chair looking at my reflection. My hair was long the way Tyrell liked it. He always said long hair made me look feminine, submissive. He liked to wrap his hand in it when he wanted to control me. "Cut it off," I told the stylist. "All of it?" she asked, surprised. "All of it." I watched as the scissors sheared away the last remnants of my old life. Locks of hair fell to the floor like dead leaves. With every snip, I felt lighter. I felt the weight of Tyrell's expectations falling away. When the stylist was done, I had a sharp, severe pixie cut. It highlighted my cheekbones and made my eyes look larger, fiercer. Then came the dye. We darkened it to a deep raven black. I put on a pair of thick-framed, nerdy glasses that Evelyn had provided. I washed the makeup off my face, leaving my skin bare. I looked in the mirror. The woman staring back was not the broken wife crying in the courthouse. She was efficient. She was plain. She was invisible. She looked like someone you would hand your coat to and forget 5 seconds later. "Perfect," Evelyn said, standing behind me. "Now put this on." She handed me a gray uniform. It was stiff and unflattering. I stepped into the changing room and pulled it on. It fit perfectly. I buttoned the collar all the way to my chin. I looked at myself one last time. Aaliyah Brooks was gone. In her place stood a ghost. We drove through the night, leaving the city behind. The lights of the skyscrapers faded, replaced by the dark, winding roads of Long Island. We arrived in the Hamptons just as the sun was beginning to bleed into the horizon. The gates of the Vance estate were massive wrought iron masterpieces that towered over the road. They swung open silently. We drove up a long, winding driveway lined with ancient oak trees. And then I saw it. The mansion. It was a sprawling stone structure that looked like something out of a Gothic novel. It was beautiful, intimidating, and lonely. It was mine. All of it was mine. But then I looked to the right. Just across the hedgerow I saw the roof of the neighboring villa. The lights were on. I could see a moving truck in the driveway. A familiar black SUV was parked out front. Tyrell and Caroline had arrived. I stepped out of the car, breathing in the salty ocean air. I adjusted my glasses. I smoothed down my gray apron. I was walking into the lion's den, not with a gun, but with a feather duster. I walked up the steps of my own home, ready to open the door for the people who tried to destroy me. Let the games begin. The iron gates of the Vance estate groaned open, a sound that echoed through the quiet Hamptons morning, like the opening of a crypt. I stood at the end of the long driveway, clutching a modest duffel bag that contained only the essentials for my new life. The Rolls-Royce had driven away, leaving me alone with the monster of a house that was now legally mine. It sat on a hill overlooking the ocean, a sprawling Gothic Revival masterpiece made of gray stone that seemed to absorb the sunlight rather than reflect it. It did not look like a home. It looked like a fortress. I looked down at myself. The gray uniform was stiff and scratchy against my skin. The white apron was tied tight around my waist. My hair, once my pride, was now a short, severe pixie cut dyed a color so black it looked unnatural. I pushed my thick-rimmed glasses up my nose. Aaliyah Brooks, the discarded wife, had ceased to exist. In her place stood Lee, the invisible housekeeper. I walked up the stone steps, my cheap work shoes clicking rhythmically. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the heavy brass key Evelyn had given me. It felt cold and heavy, a physical reminder of the weight I was about to carry. I slid it into the lock. With a satisfying heavy thud, the mechanism turned. The door swung open, revealing a foyer that was larger than the entire apartment I had shared with Tyrell. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light slicing through the drawn velvet curtains. The air smelled of beeswax old paper and the faint lingering scent of cherry pipe tobacco. Uncle Otis. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me, sealing myself in. The silence was absolute. I walked through the grand hallway, my fingers trailing over the mahogany banister. I passed portraits of ancestors I never knew I had. Stern men in suits, women in pearls. They watched me with painted eyes, judging the new custodian of their legacy. Evelyn had told me to familiarize myself with the layout before the neighbors came knocking. I moved through the ballroom, the commercial-sized kitchen, and the sunroom, but my feet seemed to know where they wanted to go. They led me to the library in the east wing. It was a massive room lined from floor to ceiling with books. A rolling ladder rested against the shelves. A heavy oak desk sat in the center of the room, cluttered with maps and blueprints. I walked behind the desk and sat in the leather chair. It creaked, the leather worn soft by decades of use. I placed my hands on the wood, closing my eyes, trying to feel a connection to the man who had sat here before me. Otis Vance, the man who clipped coupons for tuna cans while sitting on an empire. I opened the top drawer, pens, paper clips, a magnifying glass. Normal. I opened the side drawers, nothing but stationery. I frowned. Evelyn had said Otis left instructions. I stood up and walked to the bookshelf behind the desk. I scanned the titles: History, Philosophy, Economics. And then I saw it. A copy of The Count of Monte Cristo. It was the only fiction book on the shelf. I pulled it out. As the book tilted, I heard a sharp click. The entire section of the bookshelf groaned and swung inward just an inch. A hidden door. My heart hammered against my ribs. I pulled the shelf open. Behind it was a small, windowless room, illuminated by a single motion sensor light that flickered to life as I stepped inside. It was not a panic room, it was an intelligence center. File cabinets lined the walls. But unlike the dusty library, these were modern steel and locked. On a small metal table sat a single key and a note written in shaky handwriting. For the one who is smart enough to look behind the story. I took the key. I walked to the first cabinet labeled Current Threats. I unlocked it and pulled out the drawer. My breath caught in my throat. There were folders on everyone: the mayor of New York, the zoning board members of the Hamptons, real estate developers, competitors, and there, near the front, was a thick manila folder labeled Brooks Real Estate. My hands trembled as I pulled it out. I opened it on the metal table. Otis knew. He knew everything. There were photographs of Tyrell meeting with loan sharks in New Jersey. There were copies of the fraudulent loan applications Tyrell had forged using my social security number 3 years ago. There was a detailed timeline of Tyrell's affair with Caroline dating back 2 years, complete with hotel receipts and flight manifests. I felt a wave of nausea followed by a surge of pure, white-hot adrenaline. Tyrell had gaslighted me for years. He told me I was crazy when I suspected he was cheating. He told me I was bad with money when the bank called. He made me believe I was the problem. But here in black and white was the proof. Otis had been watching Tyrell bleed me dry. He had compiled this dossier not just to protect his assets, but to give me the ammunition I would eventually need. I flipped to the back of the file. There was a sticky note attached to a document detailing a high-risk loan Tyrell had just taken out to rent the villa next door. The note read, "He is overextended. One push, and he falls." I traced the handwriting with my finger. "Thank you, Uncle Otis," I whispered. I spent the next hour memorizing the numbers. Tyrell was desperate. He needed a merger with Crown Holdings within 90 days, or the bank would call in his loans and he would face prison time for fraud. That was why he was here. He was hunting for a savior. He had no idea that the savior he was looking for was the wife he had thrown in the trash. I closed the file and locked it back in the cabinet. I pushed the bookshelf back into place, hiding the secret room. I felt different. I wasn't just a housekeeper anymore. I was a spy. I was a predator lying in wait. I walked back out into the main hall, my mind racing with plans. I needed to clean the foyer. I needed to look busy. I needed to prepare the stage. The heavy oak door of the Vance estate stood between my past and my present. My hand hovered over the cold brass handle. On the other side were the two people who had stripped me of my dignity, my home, and my identity. They were standing on my porch, ringing my doorbell, waiting to charm the wealthy owner of this mansion. They had no idea that the owner was currently wearing a polyester uniform and holding a feather duster. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of lemon polish and old wood. I adjusted my thick glasses. I smoothed down the starch-white apron that cut into my waist. I was not Aaliyah Brooks, the heartbroken ex-wife. I was Lee, the invisible servant. I unlocked the deadbolt. It clicked with a heavy final sound that echoed in the cavernous foyer. I pulled the door open. Sunlight flooded the entryway, momentarily blinding me. As my eyes adjusted, two silhouettes took shape against the backdrop of the manicured lawn and the shimmering ocean beyond. Tyrell stood in front, posing as if he were on the cover of a business magazine. He wore a beige linen suit that screamed summer in the Hamptons, a silk scarf loosely draped around his neck, and loafers that probably cost more than a Honda Civic. Beside him was Caroline. She was wearing an oversized sun hat and a floral sundress that was cut low enough to be suggestive but high enough to feign class. She held a basket of store-bought muffins wrapped in cellophane. They were smiling the fake predatory smiles of salespeople desperate to close a deal. "Good morning," Tyrell began, his voice booming with practiced confidence. "We are your new neighbors from the villa adjacent to the estate. We were hoping to have a word with the master of the house regarding—" He stopped mid-sentence. His smile faltered. His eyes hidden behind aviator sunglasses narrowed. He took a step closer, peering at me through the mesh screen door. I stood perfectly still, my head slightly bowed, my hands clasped in front of my apron. I did not speak. I let him look. "Wait a minute," Tyrell whispered. He took off his sunglasses. The color drained from his face, replaced by a look of utter confusion that quickly morphed into disbelief. Caroline, who was busy checking her reflection in her compact mirror, looked up annoyed. "What is it, Tyrell? Why did you stop talking? Is the owner not home?" "Look," Tyrell said, pointing a shaking finger at me. "Look who opened the door." Caroline stepped forward, squinting. Her eyes widened. Her jaw dropped. For a moment, the only sound was the distant crashing of waves and the chirping of crickets. "Aaliyah," she breathed. I remained silent. I kept my face blank, devoid of emotion. I was an object. I was furniture. Tyrell let out a short, incredulous laugh. It started as a chuckle and grew into a loud, barking guffaw. He slapped his thigh. "I do not believe it," he wheezed. "I actually do not believe it. Aaliyah, is this where you ended up?" He pushed the screen door open without asking, stepping into my foyer as if he owned it. Caroline followed, her shock dissolving into a twisted delight. She walked around me, inspecting my uniform, my sensible shoes, my short hair. "Oh, this is rich," Caroline sneered. "This is poetic justice. We thought you were dead or living in a shelter. But look at you. You are a maid. A literal maid." She reached out and flicked the collar of my uniform. Polyester, she noted with a grimace. "How fitting. You finally found a job that matches your skill set, Aaliyah. Cleaning up after people who actually matter." My blood boiled. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell them to get out of my house. I wanted to tell them that the rug they were standing on was worth more than their lives. But I remembered Uncle Otis. I remembered the $47 million. I swallowed the rage until it tasted like bile in my throat. "May I help you, sir, madam?" I said. My voice was low, rough, and subservient. Tyrell wiped a tear of laughter from his eye. "Oh, you can help us all right. We are looking for the owner, Mr. Vance's heir. We heard he is a recluse. Is he in? The master is currently unavailable." I recited the script Evelyn had prepared. "He does not see visitors without an appointment." Tyrell's face hardened instantly. He switched from mocking ex-husband to arrogant businessman. "Listen to me, Aaliyah, or whatever you call yourself now. I know you are just the help, but try to use that small brain of yours. We are not just visitors. We are important business partners. We need to see him. Now." "I am afraid that is impossible," I said, keeping my eyes on the floor. "He left strict instructions." Caroline huffed, rolling her eyes. "Ugh, she is just as useless as she was when she was your wife, Tyrell. Useless and stubborn." She walked past me, heading straight for the grand living room. "Well, since we are already here, and it is terribly hot outside, I am going to wait. Go fetch me something to drink, Aaliyah." She sat down on my vintage velvet sofa, crossing her legs. She kicked off her heels, letting them drop onto the Persian carpet. "I beg your pardon, madam," I said. "You heard her," Tyrell snapped, walking over to the fireplace and picking up a priceless Ming vase to inspect it. "We are guests, and you are the maid. So do your job. Caroline wants a drink." Caroline waved her hand dismissively. "I want fresh orange juice, not from a carton. Squeeze it yourself. And light ice. If it is too watery, I will pour it on this rug. And bring Tyrell a scotch. Neat. And make it the expensive stuff, not whatever swill you drink." I stood there watching them invade my sanctuary. Tyrell was handling my antiques with his greasy hands. Caroline was putting her bare feet on my furniture. They were treating me like a subhuman species. This was the test. This was the moment Otis warned me about. If I broke character now, I lost everything. If I threw them out, they would know I had power. I took a deep, shuddering breath. I forced my hands to unclench. I forced my posture to slump, making myself look smaller, defeated. "Veto." "I mean very good, madam," I stammered. "I will prepare the refreshments immediately." "Excellent," Caroline said, not even looking at me. She pulled out her phone. "And hurry up. We have a schedule to keep. We cannot spend all day watching you struggle to find the kitchen." I turned and walked toward the kitchen. As I passed the hallway mirror, I saw Tyrell watching me walk away. His eyes were cold, devoid of any past affection. "Sad," he muttered to Caroline. "She really hit rock bottom. I almost feel bad for her." Almost. "Save your pity," Tyrell Caroline's voice drifted down the hall. "She deserves this. Some people are born to lead, and some are born to serve. She is just finally in her natural habitat." I pushed through the swinging doors of the kitchen. The moment I was out of sight, I leaned against the marble counter, shaking. Not from fear, but from the effort of holding back the hurricane inside me. They thought they had won. They thought they had found me at my lowest point. I reached into the deep pocket of my apron. My hand closed around my smartphone. I pulled it out. The screen was glowing red. Recording in progress. 10 minutes, 32 seconds. I had recorded every word, every insult, every threat, every admission of their arrogance. I walked to the oversized refrigerator and pulled out a bag of oranges. I grabbed a knife. I began to slice the fruit with precision. "You want fresh juice, Caroline?" I whispered to the empty kitchen. "I will give you fresh juice." I squeezed the oranges, the juice running over my fingers. I prepared the tray. I placed the crystal glasses on a silver platter. But before I walked back out there, I tapped the screen on my phone again. I saved the file. I named it Evidence Number 1. I adjusted my glasses. I put the subservient mask back on. I picked up the heavy tray. "I am coming, madam," I thought. "Enjoy your drink, because it is the last sweet thing you will ever taste from me." For the next 3 days, I became a ghost in my own home. I woke up at 5 in the morning to polish silver that was already shining. I ironed sheets that were already crisp. I learned the rhythm of the house, the creak of the floorboards, and the way the light hit the dust motes in the library. But mostly I learned the rhythm of my neighbors. Tyrell and Caroline treated the property line between our estates as a suggestion rather than a rule. Because the actual owner of the Vance estate remained unseen, they treated me, the lowly housekeeper, as their personal resource. On Tuesday, Caroline yelled over the hedge that her pool boy was late and demanded I come skim the leaves off her water. I did it. I stood there in the scorching sun, dragging the net through their chemically over-treated pool, while Caroline sat on a lounge chair 5 feet away, complaining on the phone that the ice in her margarita was melting too fast. She didn't even look at me. To her, I was just a mechanism that kept her world pretty. On Wednesday, Tyrell caught me taking out the trash. He whistled at me like I was a dog. "Hey, Lee, come here," he shouted. I walked over to the fence, keeping my head down and my glasses perched on my nose. He pointed to a row of hydrangeas on my side of the property. "Those bushes are blocking my view of the sunset. Cut them down." I tightened my grip on the trash bag. "Sir, those are prize-winning hydrangeas planted by the late Mr. Vance's mother," I said softly. "I don't care who planted them," Tyrell snapped, adjusting his silk tie. "They are obstructing my view. And since I am about to go into business with your boss, I suggest you make me happy, unless you want me to mention your insubordination when I meet him." I cut the bushes. I took a pair of shears and hacked away at the beautiful blue flowers, my heart breaking with every snip. But as I worked, sweating in my gray uniform, I listened. Tyrell was pacing on his patio, talking loudly on his phone. "I am telling you, the loan is coming through," he was shouting. "I just need a bridge loan to cover the payroll." "Yes, I know I am overextended. Just move the funds from the escrow account." "No, I don't care if it is illegal. Just do it." I smiled inwardly. He was confessing to wire fraud within earshot of the maid. He was so arrogant, so sure of his superiority, that he didn't think the woman pruning the bushes had the intelligence to understand what an escrow account was. I finished the job, gathered the clippings, and walked back to the main house. I went straight to the secret room and added a new note to his file. Wire fraud, date, time, witnessed by Lee. By Friday, their audacity reached a fever pitch. They decided to host a massive barbecue to impress the local socialites. They wanted to project the image of the happy, wealthy power couple. They hired a DJ, they rented white leather furniture, and of course they ran out of ice. At 7 in the evening, Caroline banged on my service entrance door. "We need ice," she demanded, not even saying hello. "And we need extra trash bags. Our caterer is incompetent." I fetched them the ice. I brought them the bags. I even carried a heavy cooler across the lawn for them because Tyrell claimed he had a bad back. The party was loud. The bass from the speakers thumped against the stone walls of my mansion. I watched from the darkened window of the master bedroom on the second floor. I saw them down there laughing, drinking, and pretending to be the kings of the world. Tyrell was holding court with a group of bankers, probably lying about his assets. Caroline was flirting with a young architect. They looked so comfortable. They looked like they had won. I looked at the iPad in my hand. It controlled the smart home features of the entire estate, including the perimeter irrigation system. Uncle Otis had installed industrial-strength sprinklers to maintain the immaculate lawns. They were powerful enough to mimic a heavy rainfall. I zoomed in on the map. Zone 4 covered the west hedge, the exact spot where Tyrell had set up the buffet tables and the DJ booth. I checked the time. It was 11:30. The party was at its peak. I tapped the screen. I set the water pressure to maximum. I set the duration to 30 minutes, and then I pressed the button labeled Manual Override. Below me, chaos erupted instantly. A wall of water, pressurized and cold, shot up from the ground like geysers. It wasn't a gentle mist, it was a deluge. The sprinklers oscillated wildly, soaking the white leather furniture, the expensive silk dresses, and the DJ's equipment. I heard the screams through the glass. "My hair!" Caroline shrieked, her voice reaching a pitch that could shatter glass. "Turn it off! Turn it off!" Tyrell was running around like a headless chicken trying to cover the buffet with his jacket, but it was useless. The water was relentless. The guests realized their designer clothes were being ruined, began to stampede toward the exit. The music died with a spark and a pop as the speakers shorted out. I stood in the dark, sipping a glass of iced water. I watched Caroline slip on the wet grass and land face first in a puddle of mud. I watched Tyrell screaming at a sprinkler head trying to kick it only to get blasted in the face with a jet of water. It was petty. It was childish. And it was the most satisfying moment of my life. I watched until the last guest had fled and the sprinklers finally hissed into silence, leaving the power couple standing in a ruined, muddy wasteland. The next morning, the sun rose on a scene of devastation next door. Tyrell looked like a walking corpse. He was sitting on his patio, head in his hands, surrounded by soggy decorations. I walked out to the edge of the property with my broom sweeping imaginary dust, just to see the aftermath up close. "Hey you," Tyrell croaked when he saw me. He didn't even have the energy to yell. "Your sprinklers ruined my party. I am going to sue your boss." I adjusted my glasses. "I am terribly sorry, sir," I said, keeping my face neutral. "The system is automated. It detects dry soil. Perhaps the heat from your party triggered the sensors." Tyrell groaned. "Just get away from me." Suddenly his phone pinged. It was the distinct chime of a priority email. He ignored it. It pinged again, and again. He sighed and pulled the phone from his pocket. He squinted at the screen, rubbing his bloodshot eyes. Then he froze. He sat up straight. He blinked as if he couldn't believe what he was reading. "Caroline!" he screamed, his voice cracking. "Caroline, get out here!" Caroline emerged from the house looking disheveled, her hair wrapped in a towel. "What is it, Tyrell?" "I am trying to salvage my blowout." "Read this," Tyrell said, shoving the phone in her face. His hands were shaking. Caroline read it out loud, her voice trembling. "Dear Mr. Brooks, regarding your request for a partnership meeting, I have reviewed your preliminary proposal. While I have reservations, I am willing to hear you out. I will be in residence at the Hamptons estate this weekend. Come to the main house tomorrow at 4 p.m. sharp. Do not be late. Signed, the chairman, Crown Holdings." Tyrell let out a whoop of joy. He jumped up, knocking over his chair. "He wants to meet," Tyrell yelled. "He is here. The recluse is actually here. And he wants to see me." Caroline looked at the phone, then at the mansion behind me. "Oh my God, Tyrell. We did it. We are going to be rich." Tyrell looked at me, his eyes wild with excitement. "You. Maid. Did you know he was coming?" I gripped the broom handle. "I did not, sir," I lied smoothly. "Well, make sure the house is spotless," Tyrell ordered, pointing a finger at my chest. "We are coming over tomorrow at 4, and this is the most important meeting of my life. If there is a single speck of dust, I will have you fired. Do you understand?" I looked at him. I looked at the man who had discarded me, the man who had cheated me, the man who was now ordering me to clean my own house so he could beg me for money. "I understand perfectly, sir," I said. I turned and walked back toward the mansion. I had 24 hours to prepare. Tyrell thought he was walking into a boardroom. He had no idea he was walking into an execution chamber, and the executioner would be serving him tea. The grandfather clock in the main hallway struck 4 times, the sound reverberating through the house like a judge's gavel. I stood in the shadow of the library doorway, smoothing the front of my gray apron. My hands were gloved in white cotton, hiding the fact that my knuckles were white from clenching them so hard. The stage was set. The lighting was dimmed to create an atmosphere of intimidation. The air smelled of expensive leather and the freshly brewed Jamaican Blue Mountain coffee I had prepared specifically because I knew it was Tyrell's favorite. I had hired Mr. Henderson for this afternoon. He was not a businessman. He was a retired character actor I found through a high-end talent agency in the city. With his silver hair, impeccable 3-piece suit, and a voice that sounded like gravel mixed with honey, he looked more like a billionaire than anyone in my actual family. I briefed him for 3 hours this morning. His role was simple. He was Mr. Sterling, the senior executive assistant to the chairman of Crown Holdings. He was to say very little, look unimpressed, and let Terrell dig his own grave. The doorbell rang. I waited exactly 10 seconds before opening it, letting the anticipation build. When I pulled the heavy door back, Tyrell and Caroline were standing there. Tyrell was sweating despite the cool ocean breeze. He was clutching a leather portfolio so tightly his fingers were red. Caroline was wearing a dress that was far too formal for a Tuesday afternoon, trying desperately to look like old money, but the flashy logo on her handbag screamed new debt. "Good afternoon," I said, keeping my head bowed and my voice devoid of life. "Mr. Sterling is expecting you in the library." Tyrell didn't even look at me. He pushed past me, his eyes darting around the foyer, calculating the value of the paintings on the walls. Caroline followed, wrinkling her nose as if the air inside was not up to her standards. "Take my coat," she ordered, dropping her silk wrap onto the floor without checking if I was there to catch it. I picked it up silently, hanging it on the rack. I followed them into the library. Mr. Henderson was sitting behind Uncle Otis's massive oak desk. He didn't stand up. He didn't smile. He simply gestured to the two chairs positioned slightly lower than the desk. It was a psychological trick I learned from Tyrell. Make the opponent sit lower than you, and they will feel inferior. "Mr. Brooks," Mr. Henderson said, his voice filling the room, "the chairman has heard interesting things about you. You have 20 minutes. Impress me." Tyrell sat down nervously, adjusting his tie. He opened his portfolio and began to lay out graphs and charts. I moved to the sidebar to prepare the coffee. I was invisible to them, just a part of the furniture, which allowed me to hear every single lie that came out of his mouth. "Crown Holdings is looking for a partner with stability." Tyrell began, his voice shaky at first, but gaining confidence as he went into his sales pitch. "As you can see here, Brooks Real Estate has seen a year-over-year growth of 40%. We have zero toxic assets and our liquidity is at an all-time high." I paused while pouring the water. 40% growth. The reality was that his company was bleeding cash. He had leveraged his properties 3 times over. The graphs he was showing were completely fabricated. He was presenting projected numbers as actuals. It was fraud, plain and simple. Mr. Henderson picked up one of the charts, looking at it over his reading glasses. "Impressive numbers, Mr. Brooks. But rumor has it that your liquidity was tied up in a recent divorce settlement. The chairman does not like drama. He prefers partners with clean slates." Tyrell laughed, a dismissive, arrogant sound that made my skin crawl. He waved his hand as if swatting away a fly. "Oh, that," Tyrell said, leaning back in his chair. "Please do not worry about that. My ex-wife was a non-factor. She was a simple woman, mentally unstable, unfortunately. She had a spending problem, a gambling addiction, actually. I tried to help her, but in the end I had to cut her loose to protect the company. The settlement was heavily in my favor because the courts recognized her incompetence." I stood directly behind him, holding the silver coffee pot. My hand hovered inches from his head. I could see the sweat beading on his neck. He was calling me mentally unstable. He was accusing me of the gambling debts that he and Caroline had racked up in Atlantic City. He was painting himself as the martyr who survived a toxic marriage, when in reality, he was the parasite who drained me dry. I took a deep breath. I focused on the heat of the coffee pot. I poured the dark liquid into the china cup over Tyrell's shoulder. "Coffee, sir," I whispered. He didn't acknowledge me. He just reached for the cup, his eyes still fixed on Mr. Henderson. "She was a leech, really," Tyrell continued, taking a sip of the coffee I made. "She didn't understand vision. She wanted a small life. I am a man who builds empires. I need partners who understand that sacrifice is necessary for greatness. That is why I am here. I am ready to ascend to the next level, and I have shed the dead weight that was holding me down." Mr. Henderson looked at me for a split second. I gave him a microscopic nod. "I see," Mr. Henderson said, closing the file. "The chairman values ruthlessness. It seems you have that in abundance." Caroline chimed in, leaning forward and placing her hand on Tyrell's arm. "And we are a family business now, Mr. Sterling. I manage the operations. We are a streamlined, efficient team. Unlike the chaos of the past, we are poised for global expansion. You manage operations, Mr. Henderson asked, raising an eyebrow. Caroline smiled, flashing her veneers. Yes, I bring the sophistication and the network. Tyrell is the builder, I am the brand. I almost laughed out loud. Caroline couldn't manage a lemonade stand. She was the reason their overhead costs were astronomical. Mr. Henderson stood up. The meeting was over. I will convey your proposal to the chairman, he said, his face unreadable. He is a man of action. If he is interested, you will hear from us. If not, do not call us again. Tyrell jumped up, extending his hand, but Mr. Henderson pretended not to see it and turned to look out the window. Tyrell awkwardly pulled his hand back, wiping his palm on his pants. Thank you, Mr. Sterling, Tyrell said. Please tell the chairman that Brooks Real Estate is the future. I escorted them out of the library and back into the foyer. The tension in Tyrell's shoulders had evaporated, replaced by the high of his own performance. He thought he had crushed it. He thought he had charmed the gatekeeper. As I handed Caroline her silk wrap, she lingered for a moment. Tyrell was already walking out the door, punching the air in victory. Caroline turned to look at me. Her eyes were narrow, calculating. She looked at my shoes. She looked at the way I held my hands. There was something in her gaze that made my stomach drop. She didn't recognize me, but she sensed something. She sensed a threat. Or perhaps she just needed someone to punish for the stress she had just endured. She leaned in close to Tyrell as he waited for her on the porch step. She didn't whisper quietly enough. She wanted me to hear. Tyrell, she hissed. What Tyrell asked, checking his phone. That housekeeper, Carolyn said, tilting her head toward me. She gives me the creeps. She was standing behind us the whole time. Listening. I don't like her eyes. She looks too intelligent for a maid. Tyrell shrugged. Who cares, Caro? We nailed the meeting. I care, Caroline snapped. If we are going to be frequent visitors here, I don't want her hovering around. She looks like the type who snoops. She paused, a cruel smile spreading across her face. Maybe we should solve the problem before it starts, she whispered. Next time we come over, I will slip my diamond earrings into her apron pocket. Then we call the police. The chairman will have to fire her for theft. And then we can recommend our own staff, someone loyal to us. Tyrell laughed, wrapping his arm around her. You are wicked, Caroline. That is why I love you. Let's go celebrate. I feel like champagne. They walked down the stone steps, laughing at the prospect of sending an innocent woman to jail just because they didn't like the way she looked. I stood in the doorway watching them go. I felt a cold chill run down my spine. They were not just greedy, they were evil. They were willing to destroy a stranger's life just to feel a little more comfortable. I closed the door and locked it. I walked back to the library where Mr. Henderson was loosening his tie and pouring himself a glass of whiskey. Did you get it all, Miss Vance? He asked, dropping the act. I walked over to the hidden bookshelf and pulled it open. I took out the file labeled Brooks Real Estate. I got it all, I said, my voice steady and hard. The fraud, the lies, and now the conspiracy to commit a crime. I looked at the date on the calendar. They want to frame me for theft, I said to the empty room. Fine, let them try. But they are going to find out that when you try to trap a wolf, you better make sure you don't step in your own snare. I picked up the phone and dialed Evelyn. Get the police on standby for the next meeting, I said. We are going to have a live demonstration of justice. 2 days after the initial meeting, Tyrell and Caroline returned to the estate. They were vibrating with nervous energy, desperate for an update from the chairman. I had stalled them with a generic email saying the board was reviewing their file, but I knew they were getting impatient. They didn't come to discuss business this time. They came to mark their territory. They arrived unannounced, claiming they wanted to measure the windows for new drapes they planned to install once the merger was finalized. It was delusional, of course, but I had to play along. I followed them from room to room, holding a notepad, while Caroline criticized the existing silk curtains that were imported from Italy. Around 3 in the afternoon, the atmosphere shifted. Caroline was becoming increasingly agitated. She kept glaring at me when she thought I wasn't looking. I could feel her eyes boring into my back, filled with that specific mix of boredom and malice that rich women get when they feel threatened by someone they consider beneath them. She didn't like that I was quiet. She didn't like that I was efficient. And most of all, she didn't like that Tyrell had mentioned I had nice eyes for a maid. "Excuse me," Caroline said, stopping abruptly in the hallway. "I need to use the powder room, the one off the foyer. And Lee makes sure there are fresh towels. The ones there looked a bit flat." "Of course, madam," I said, bowing my head. I watched her walk into the small, opulent bathroom. She closed the door, but not all the way. I stood by the staircase waiting. A few minutes passed. I heard the water running. Then I heard the distinct clatter of metal hitting marble. It was a heavy sound, deliberate. Caroline emerged a moment later, drying her hands on a towel she immediately dropped on the floor. "I am going to the garden to find Tyrell," she announced, walking past me without making eye contact. I waited until she was outside. Then, moving with the silence of a shadow, I slipped into the powder room. There it was, sitting on the edge of the sink, gleaming under the vanity lights. Her watch. It wasn't just any watch. It was a vintage gold Rolex day-date with a diamond bezel. I recognized it immediately. Tyrell had bought it for me for our second anniversary. When we divorced, he claimed he had lost it. Seeing it now sitting there as a trap made my blood turn to ice. She had left it there on purpose. She was going to claim I stole it. It was the oldest trick in the book. The wealthy guest leaves a valuable item, claims it disappeared, blames the help, and calls the police. It was a power move designed to destroy me. I looked at the watch. Then I looked at the mirror. Aaliyah Brooks would have panicked. But Lee, the housekeeper, was prepared. I reached into my apron pocket. I took out the Rolex. I didn't steal it. I simply moved it to a safe place. A very safe place. Then I replaced it with something else I had been carrying around for days, waiting for the right moment. I walked back out to the foyer and resumed my post by the door. 10 minutes later, Caroline came rushing back in, dragging Tyrell by the arm. She was putting on a performance worthy of an Academy Award. She was panting, her face flushed, clutching her wrist. "It is gone, Tyrell!" she shrieked. I took it off to wash my hands because the soap ruins the gold. I left it right on the sink. I went outside for 5 minutes, and now it is gone. Tyrell looked annoyed, but he played his part. "Are you sure, Caro? Maybe it fell on the floor." "I checked the floor," she yelled. "I checked everywhere. It was my gold Rolex, the one you gave me." She spun around and pointed a manicured finger directly at my face. She took it. I took a step back, widening my eyes behind my glasses. "Madam, I do not know what you are talking about. Do not lie to me, you thief!" Caroline screamed, advancing on me. "You were the only one in the hallway. I saw you lurking there like a vulture. You waited for me to leave and you snatched it." Tyrell stepped forward, looking at me with deep disappointment. "Lee, if you took it, just give it back. We won't call the police. We know times are tough for people like you. Just hand it over and you can leave. People like me." The phrase hung in the air, heavy and toxic. Tyrell stood there, the man who used to hold my hand when I was scared, now accusing me of theft without a shred of evidence. He didn't even ask for my side of the story. He just assumed that because I wore a uniform, I was a criminal. "I did not take anything, sir," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "I have been standing here the whole time, liar." Caroline spat. She was in my face now, her perfume overpowering and cloying. "I know you have it. I can see it in your face. You are guilty. Give it to me." I raised my hands, showing my empty palms. "I do not have it, madam. Please, you are mistaken." "I am not mistaken," Caroline hissed. "I want you to empty your pockets. Now." I looked at Tyrell. "Sir, please. This is humiliating." Tyrell looked away, shrugging his shoulders. "She is missing a $50,000 watch, Lee. If you have nothing to hide, just empty your pockets. It is a reasonable request. A reasonable request. To strip search an employee in the middle of the hallway." "I will not," I said firmly. That is a violation of my rights. Caroline let out a laugh that sounded like glass breaking. Rights. You do not have rights in my house. Well, soon to be my house. If you won't do it, I will do it for you. She lunged at me. It happened so fast I almost didn't react. She grabbed the front of my apron, yanking me forward. Tyrell didn't move. He didn't try to stop her. He just watched, a passive observer to my assault. He watched his sister-in-law manhandle the woman he thought was a stranger. Caroline jammed her hand into the deep front pocket of my apron. Her eyes were wild with triumph. She knew the watch was there. She had probably planted it on me earlier when she bumped into me in the kitchen, or she expected to find it because she thought I was stupid enough to steal it. She dug around her sharp nails, scratching my thigh through the fabric. "I got it," she screamed. "I feel it. I told you, Tyrell. I told you she was a thief." She grabbed the hard metallic object at the bottom of my pocket and yanked it out, holding it up to the light like a trophy. "Gotcha," she yelled. But silence followed. Caroline blinked. She looked at her hand. Tyrell leaned in, squinting. It wasn't a gold Rolex. It was a small silver USB drive. Caroline's face went from victorious to confused in a split second. She turned the USB drive over in her hand. "What is this?" she whispered. "Where is my watch?" I smoothed down my apron, adjusting my glasses. I stood up straighter, shedding a fraction of the submissive posture I had held for weeks. "I believe that belongs to me, madam," I said, my voice calm and cold. Caroline stared at the USB drive. Then she plunged her hand back into my pocket. She ripped it inside out. A lint roller fell out. A pen, a crumpled tissue. Nothing else. No watch. "It is not here," she gasped. She checked my other pocket. Empty. She patted down my sides. Nothing. Tyrell looked at Caroline, his expression shifting from support to irritation. "Caroline, are you sure you left it on the sink?" "I am positive, Tyrell," she screeched, backing away from me as if I were a magician who had just performed a terrifying trick. "She did something with it. She hid it." I took a step forward. Tyrell stepped back instinctively. "Madam," I said, "you just assaulted me. You accused me of a felony. And you found nothing. I suggest you check your purse. Perhaps in your haste to accuse the help you forgot where you put your own belongings." Caroline looked at me with pure hatred, but her hand shook as she reached into her handbag, which was sitting on the console table. She rummaged through it aggressively. "It is not in here, I tell you," she muttered. "I am not crazy. I left it on the—" Her voice died. She slowly pulled her hand out of her bag. In her palm sat the gold Rolex. Tyrell let out a long, exhausted sigh. "Caroline, seriously." Caroline stared at the watch. Her face turned a deep, splotchy red. She looked at the watch, then at me. Her eyes were wide with fear. She knew she hadn't put it there. She knew she had left it on the sink. She knew that I must have moved it. But she couldn't say that. She couldn't admit she tried to frame me without admitting she was careless or malicious. I must have slipped it in there without thinking," she stammered. I reached out and plucked the USB drive from her frozen fingers. "I am glad you found it, madam," I said. "And this drive. You should be careful with it. It contains very sensitive information. You wouldn't want to lose it." I held her gaze. For a second she saw it. She saw Aaliyah. But then the moment passed. Tyrell grabbed Caroline's arm. "Let's go, Caroline. You have embarrassed us enough for one day. I am sorry, Lee. Keep the change." He threw a $20 bill on the floor at my feet and dragged a shell-shocked Caroline out the door. I watched them leave. I bent down and picked up the $20 bill. I looked at the USB drive in my hand. It contained the video footage from the hidden camera in the library, the footage of Tyrell admitting to fraud. "You wanted to find something in my pocket, Caroline," I whispered. "You found the weapon that is going to end you. You just didn't know how to pull the trigger." I put the USB back in my pocket and went to the kitchen. I had a dinner to prepare. After all revenge, is a dish best served cold. The silence in the hallway was heavy, suffocating, and absolutely delicious. Caroline stood frozen, clutching her gold Rolex as if it were a live grenade she didn't know how to throw. Her face was a kaleidoscope of emotions. First came the shock of finding the watch she claimed was stolen inside her own handbag. Then came the realization that she had been caught in a lie. And finally, the ugly twisting snarl of a cornered animal trying to bite its way out. I stood before her holding the silver USB drive between my thumb and forefinger. It was cool to the touch. This tiny piece of metal held the destruction of Tyrell's company, but right now, I didn't even need to use it. I just needed to use the truth. "I believe you owe me an apology, madam," I said. My voice was low, stripping away the submissive housekeeper tone and replacing it with something harder. Something that sounded dangerously like Aaliyah. Caroline's eyes darted from the watch to me. She shoved the Rolex onto her wrist, the clasp clicking loudly in the quiet house. "Apology. You want an apology from me? You probably put it there yourself. You are a magician with pockets, aren't you? You sleight of hand thief." I took a slow step forward. Tyrell flinched. He looked at me, then at his wife, his brow furrowed. He was confused. The narrative wasn't making sense. The maid wasn't crying. The maid wasn't begging. The maid was attacking. "I did not touch your property," I stated clearly, "and I can prove it. You see, this estate is home to a billionaire. Did you really think we rely on the honor system for security?" I pointed up to the corner of the ceiling, hidden discreetly behind the crown molding. A tiny dark lens blinked with a faint red light. "We have a 4K surveillance system installed in every common area, including the foyer and the vanity area of the powder room entrance." I lied smoothly about the exact angle, but the threat was real enough. "I watched the live feed on my phone while I was in the kitchen. I saw you take the watch off. I saw you look in the mirror. And I saw you drop it directly into your Hermes bag before you walked out to scream at your husband." Caroline's face went white. The blood drained from her cheeks so fast she looked like a wax figure. She had been caught, not just in a mistake, but in a malicious, calculated attempt to frame an innocent woman. You watched me," she whispered. "I recorded you," I corrected, "and that footage is automatically uploaded to a cloud server accessible only by the chairman's security team. So if you want to call the police, please go ahead. I will be happy to show them the video of a wealthy socialite trying to frame a housekeeper for grand larceny. I wonder how that will play in the tabloids." For a second, I thought she might faint. But Caroline was resilient, I would give her that. Her shock instantly mutated into rage. She realized she couldn't win the theft argument, so she switched battlegrounds. "You filmed me in the bathroom," she screeched, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. "That is illegal. That is a violation of privacy. You pervert. I will sue you. I will sue this entire estate. You cannot have cameras in a private space. Tyrell, call your lawyer. We are going to own this house by the time I am done with them." Tyrell looked at me, his eyes wide. He smelled blood in the water. A lawsuit. That was a language he understood. If they could sue for privacy violation, they could leverage it for the merger. "She is right," Tyrell said, straightening his jacket, trying to regain some authority. "You crossed a line. Recording a guest in a restroom is a felony. We have you now." I stood my ground, though my heart hammered against my ribs. I knew the laws. The camera was pointed at the door and the sink area, not the toilet. It was a gray area, but I had to bluff. "It is a security zone," I said calmly. "It is a lawsuit," Caroline screamed. She lunged for her phone. "I am calling the police right now. You are finished." The front door opened. It didn't creak. It swung open with the authority of a judge entering a courtroom. A gust of wind blew into the foyer, followed by the sharp, rhythmic click of expensive heels on the marble floor. "Enough." The word cracked through the air like a whip. Caroline stopped dialing. Tyrell spun around. Evelyn Sterling stood in the doorway. She wasn't wearing her usual lawyer's suit. She was dressed in a sleek black trench coat, looking every inch the powerful executor she was. She didn't look at Tyrell or Caroline. She walked straight to me, placing herself between me and my accusers. Ms. Sterling Tyrell stammered. We we were just... I heard everything from the porch, Evelyn said, her voice icy. And let me clarify the law for you, Mr. Brooks, since your wife seems to have a law degree from Google. She turned her gaze on Caroline, dissecting her with a look of pure disdain. The camera in question is positioned in the entryway corridor of the powder room, monitoring the safe built into the wall behind the vanity. It is a disclosed security measure for the estate's insurance. It does not capture the private stalls. Therefore, it is perfectly legal. However, filing a false police report for theft, that is a crime. Attempting to frame an employee for a felony, that is defamation and fraud. Evelyn took a step closer to Caroline. So, Mrs. Brooks, do you really want to call the police? Because my legal team is on standby, and unlike yours, mine doesn't lose. Caroline shrank back. The fight went out of her. She clutched her bag, looking from Evelyn to Tyrell, realizing she was outgunned. We didn't know, Caroline mumbled. Ignorance is not a defense, Evelyn snapped. You have insulted the staff. You have disrupted the peace. And you have attempted to weaponize the legal system against this estate. Evelyn turned to me. She didn't look at me like a boss looks at a maid. She looked at me with a subtle, respectful nod. A nod of equals. Lee, did they harm you? She asked. The question hung in the air. Tyrell's head snapped up. He looked at Evelyn, then at me. His eyes narrowed. Why was the executor of the Vance estate asking the maid if she was okay? Why was there a tone of familiarity, of protection? I saw the gears turning in Tyrell's head. He looked at my hands, which were no longer trembling. He looked at my posture, which was straight and defiant. He looked at the way I held Evelyn's gaze. No, madame, I said softly, playing my part, but keeping my eyes on Tyrell. I am fine. I just want them to leave. Evelyn turned back to them. You heard her. Get out, and do not return until the chairman summons you. If he summons you. Tyrell grabbed Caroline's arm. But this time, he didn't look at her. He kept looking back at me as he dragged her toward the door. He was studying my face, trying to piece together a puzzle he didn't even know he was solving. Come on, Tyrell, Caroline whined. Shut up, Caroline, Tyrell hissed. He stopped at the door. He looked at me one last time. There was suspicion in his eyes. Deep, gnawing suspicion. You have a very good lawyer for a housekeeper, Lee Tyrell said. I work for powerful people, sir, I replied, not backing down. It comes with the territory. Tyrell didn't respond. He just stared at me for a second longer, a flicker of recognition dancing in his pupils, before he turned and walked out into the cool evening air. As the door closed, I let out a breath I had been holding for 20 minutes. My legs felt weak. I leaned against the console table. Evelyn locked the door and turned to me. Her stern face melted into a look of concern. Are you all right, Aaliyah? She asked. I looked at the USB drive in my hand. I looked at the closed door. He knows, I whispered. Or he suspects. He saw something, Evelyn. He saw me. Evelyn shook her head. He saw a threat. He saw a woman who stood up to him. Tyrell is too arrogant to believe his ex-wife could be the one pulling the strings. He thinks you are just a confident employee. No, I said, gripping the USB drive tighter. He suspects a connection. He suspects I am more than I seem. I walked to the window, watching Tyrell's car speed away down the driveway. Good, I said, a cold smile returning to my lips. Let him be suspicious. Let him be paranoid. Paranoia makes people make mistakes, and he just made his biggest one yet. I held up the USB drive. He left this house thinking he escaped a theft charge. He has no idea he just left his entire life in my pocket. I turned back to Evelyn. When is the merger signing? I asked. Friday, Evelyn replied. Then tell the police to be ready on Friday, I said. Because I am not just going to fire him, I am going to bury him. The silence that fell over the estate after Tyrell and Caroline left was heavy with unspoken threats. I knew Tyrell was suspicious. I saw the way he looked at me, his eyes narrowing as if trying to recall a face from a dream he had forgotten. But suspicion without proof is just paranoia, and right now Tyrell had bigger problems than a housekeeper with an attitude. He had a merger to secure, a company to save, and a wife who was a loose cannon. I sat in the darkened library, the only light coming from the bank of monitors hidden behind the bookshelf. It was 2 in the morning. Most people would be asleep, but predators and prey are often awake at the same hours. I was watching the perimeter cameras. The night vision turned the lush gardens of the Hamptons into a ghostly green landscape. I cycled through the feeds, the front gate, the driveway, the side garden, and then Camera 4 caught something. Camera 4 monitored the dense hedge line that separated my estate from the rental villa Tyrell and Caroline were occupying. It was a blind spot for most people, a dark corner where the trees grew thick and the shadows were deep. But Uncle Otis had installed a thermal sensor there for exactly that reason. A figure was moving through the trees. It was small, moving quickly, wrapped in a dark trench coat. I zoomed in. Even in the grainy night vision, I recognized the walk. It was the frantic, stumbling gait of someone wearing heels on uneven grass. Caroline. She was sneaking out of her own house. Was she coming back to plant evidence? Was she coming to slash my tires? I leaned closer to the screen, my heart beating a steady rhythm against my ribs. But she didn't come toward the mansion. She stopped at the old stone bench near the property line, a spot that was technically on my land, but hidden from the main house. She wasn't alone. A moment later, another figure emerged from the shadows of the service road. A man. He was tall, wearing a baseball cap pulled low and a heavy jacket. He didn't look like a lover. He looked like business. Bad business. I switched on the directional microphone. It was a piece of technology Uncle Otis had installed to monitor potential intruders, but tonight it was going to monitor a betrayal. I adjusted the frequency, filtering out the sound of the wind and the ocean. The voices crackled to life in my headset. "You are late," Caroline hissed. Her voice was shaking, not with cold, but with fear. "Traffic was bad," the man said. His voice was smooth, arrogant. I recognized it instantly. It was Julian Thorne. He was Tyrell's biggest competitor in the commercial real estate market. He was the man Tyrell hated more than anyone, a shark who had stolen 3 major contracts from Brooks Real Estate in the last year. "Did you bring it?" Julian asked. Caroline reached into her coat. I held my breath. Was it the watch again? No. She pulled out a thick manila envelope. "This is everything," she whispered, handing it to him. "It is the bid list for the next 2 quarters. It has the bottom line numbers for the downtown project and the confidential client contacts for the merger pitch Tyrell is making to Crown Holdings." Julian took the envelope, weighing it in his hand. He laughed, a low, cruel sound. "Does Tyrell know his wife is selling him out for pocket change?" "He is sinking," Caroline snapped. She lit a cigarette, the flame illuminating her pale, terrified face for a split second. "He thinks this merger will save him, but his books are cooked. I need to look out for myself. I have debts." "Ah, yes," Julian said. "The Borgata in Atlantic City called me. They said you are into them for 300,000. And another 200 to that loan shark in Jersey. You have been busy, Caroline. Just give me the money," she demanded, holding out her hand. Julian reached into his jacket and pulled out a duffel bag. He dropped it at her feet. It made a heavy thud. 500,000 in cash," Julian said. "Unmarked. Just like you asked. With this info, I will outbid Tyrell on every project. I will crush him before the Crown Holdings deal even gets to the signature phase." Caroline bent down and unzipped the bag. She touched the money with a reverence she never showed her husband. "I don't care what happens to Tyrell," she said, standing up. "He is a loser. He promised me the world and gave me a mountain of debt. I am just cashing out before the ship goes down." "Make sure you do," Julian said, turning to leave. "Because once I use this information, Tyrell is going to prison for fraud. And you do not want to be standing next to him when the feds knock on the door." "I won't be," Caroline said. "By the time they come for him, I will be in Paris." She grabbed the bag and hurried back toward the rental villa, disappearing into the shadows like a thief in the night. Julian walked back to the road. I sat back in my chair, removing the headset. The silence in the library was deafening. I felt a cold knot in my stomach. Not of pity, but of pure disgust. Tyrell had destroyed my life to be with this woman. He had called me boring, unambitious, and unworthy. He had traded a wife who would have died for him for a woman who was selling his grave plot to his worst enemy just to pay off her gambling debts. It was tragic. It was pathetic. And it was the final nail in the coffin. I tapped the keyboard. I saved the video file. I saved the audio file. I named the folder The Judas Kiss. I could have gone to the police. I could have sent this to Tyrell immediately, but that would be too merciful. Tyrell needed to feel the walls closing in. He needed to doubt his own reality. He needed to know that the rot was coming from inside his own house. I picked up a burner phone I had purchased specifically for this game. I typed in Tyrell's number. I looked at the clock. It was 2:30 in the morning. He would be asleep next to the empty space where his wife should be. Or maybe he was awake worrying about money. I typed a simple message. No threats, no capitalization. Just a cold, hard command. Check your wife's bank account. And check who she met at the property line tonight. I pressed send. I watched the screen. Delivered. I switched the camera feed to the exterior of the rental villa. A light flicked on in the master bedroom, then another. I saw a shadow move past the window. Tyrell was awake. I imagined him picking up the phone groggy and confused. I imagined him reading the words. I imagined him turning to look at Caroline, who was probably pretending to sleep with a bag of cash hidden in her closet. The seeds of doubt had been planted. Now I just had to watch them grow. Tyrell was going to come into that merger meeting on Friday thinking he was fighting for his life, not realizing he was already dead. And the person who killed him was sleeping in his bed. I closed the laptop. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the dark ocean. "Sleep tight, Tyrell," I whispered. "The nightmare is just beginning." The glow of the phone screen was the only light in the pitch-black master bedroom of the rental villa. Tyrell sat on the edge of the bed, his hand trembling as he stared at the anonymous text message. "Check your wife's bank account. And check who she met at the property line tonight." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of a death sentence. Beside him, Caroline was sleeping, her breathing deep, and even the sleep of the innocent or the sociopathic. Tyrell looked at her, really looked at her for the first time in months. In the moonlight, her face looked hard, even in repose. He unlocked his phone and opened the banking app. He navigated to their joint savings, the account they were supposed to use for the down payment on the new penthouse. Zero balance. He blinked, thinking it was a glitch. He refreshed the page. Zero. He switched to the credit card statement, maxed out. Cash advances totaling $50,000 in the last week alone. His heart began to hammer against his ribs like a trapped bird. He got up, his feet heavy on the cold floor. He walked to the window and looked out at the dark line of trees separating their rental from the Vance estate. Who had she met? Why was the money gone? Caroline. He said, his voice a hoarse croak. She stirred, mumbling into the pillow. "Go back to sleep, Tyrell." "Caroline, wake up!" he shouted, ripping the duvet off the bed. She sat up with a gasp, shielding her eyes against the sudden movement. "What is wrong with you? Are you drunk?" Tyrell threw the phone onto the mattress. It landed with a soft thud, the screen still glowing with the evidence of their financial ruin. "Where is the money, Caroline? Where is the $100,000 from the joint account?" Caroline froze. The sleep vanished from her eyes, instantly replaced by a sharp, calculating look. She reached for her silk robe, pulling it tight around her, as if it were armor. "I moved it," she lied, her voice smooth. "I moved it to an offshore account for safety. You know the banks are unstable right now." "Liar," Tyrell spat. "I just got a text. Someone saw you tonight. Someone saw you at the property line. Who were you meeting in the middle of the night, Caroline? Was it a loan shark? Or was it Julian Thorne? The name hung in the air like toxic smoke. Julian Thorne was Tyrell's nemesis, the man who had vowed to bankrupt him. Caroline stood up, her face twisting into a sneer. She didn't deny it. She didn't even try. She just walked to the vanity and began brushing her hair casually as if they were discussing the weather. "So what if I met Julian?" she said, looking at Tyrell through the mirror. "At least he has cash. At least he knows how to run a business without drowning in debt." Tyrell felt the blood drain from his face. "You sold me out. You gave him our client list, didn't you? That is why you were asking about the bid numbers yesterday. I did what I had to do." Caroline screamed, spinning around to face him. "Look at us, Tyrell. We are renting a house we cannot afford to impress a billionaire who probably won't even sign with us. You are sinking. The ship is going down, and I am not going to drown with you. I secured my future. You are my wife," Tyrell roared, stepping toward her. "You are supposed to be my partner." "Partner?" Caroline laughed, a cruel, high-pitched sound. "I am not your partner, Tyrell. I am your handler. I am the only reason you are even halfway relevant. Who tells you what to wear? Who tells you what to say in meetings? Me. You are nothing but a pretty face with a line of credit." Tyrell stopped. He felt a sudden crushing wave of regret. He thought of Aaliyah. Aaliyah who used to make him coffee in the morning. Aaliyah who clipped coupons so he could buy his first suit. Aaliyah who never asked for anything but his time. Aaliyah never would have done this. Tyrell whispered, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. She was loyal. She loved me when I had nothing. And I threw her away for you. Caroline stopped brushing her hair. She stared at him, her eyes flashing with dangerous fire. "Oh, please," she spat. "Do not rewrite history, Tyrell. You didn't throw her away." "I did." Tyrell frowned. "What are you talking about? You think you are smart enough to pull off a divorce like that?" Caroline mocked, stepping closer to him until he could smell the stale smoke on her breath. "You were too weak to leave her. You kept saying you felt guilty. So I helped you." Tyrell shook his head. "No, I left her because she was bad with money. She was ruining my credit. The lawyer showed me the debts. I created those debts, you idiot," Caroline screamed. The room went silent. The only sound was the distant ocean and the pounding of Tyrell's heart. "I took her identity." Caroline continued, her voice dripping with venom. "I used her social security number to open those credit cards. I racked up the bills. I transferred the debt to her name. And then I showed you the statements. I made you believe she was the anchor dragging you down so you would cut the rope. And you did. You did exactly what I wanted, because you are a gullible weak man who needs a woman to tell him what to think." Tyrell stumbled back until he hit the wall. His knees gave way, and he slid down to the floor. It was a lie. His entire life for the last 2 years was a lie engineered by the woman standing in front of him. Aaliyah was innocent. Aaliyah was the victim, and he was the executioner who had pulled the trigger on Caroline's command. "You are a monster," Tyrell whispered, tears streaming down his face. "You destroyed her. You made her homeless." "And I made you a star," Caroline countered. "So stop whining. We are in this together, Tyrell. You cannot leave me. If you do, I will tell the IRS about your creative accounting. I will tell the press about the bribes you paid to the zoning board. I own you." Tyrell looked at her. He hated her. He hated her more than he had ever hated anyone. But he looked at the luxury villa around him. He thought of the merger meeting that could save his company. He thought of the shame of admitting he had been conned. He was a coward. He had always been a coward. He wiped his face. He stood up slowly. He didn't scream. He didn't pack his bags. He just looked at Caroline with dead eyes. "We have the merger meeting soon," he said, his voice hollow. "That is right," Caroline said, smoothing her silk robe. "So wash your face. You look pathetic. We need to be a power couple for the chairman." Just then, a chime sounded from Tyrell's laptop on the desk. It was the priority notification sound. Tyrell walked over to the desk like a zombie. He opened the laptop. It was an email. The subject line read, "Official invitation to signing ceremony." He clicked it open. "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Brooks, the chairman of Crown Holdings has reviewed your proposal. He is impressed by your tenacity. You are cordially invited to the main estate tomorrow evening at 7 p.m. for a formal dinner and the signing of the merger agreement. Please be prompt. This will be a night to remember." Tyrell stared at the screen. They had done it. Despite the betrayal, despite the lies, despite the fact that his wife was a criminal, they had won. "We got the meeting," Tyrell said, his voice void of joy. "Tomorrow night." Caroline clapped her hands, the fight instantly forgotten. "See," she squealed. "I told you. We are winners, Tyrell. We are going to be rich." She ran to the closet to start picking out her dress. Tyrell stood by the window looking out at the Vance estate. The massive stone mansion stood silent and dark against the night sky. Somewhere in there was the mysterious chairman who was about to hand him a lifeline. But deep down, a cold dread was settling in Tyrell's stomach. He felt like a fly who had just been invited into the spider's parlor. He thought about the text message again. Who had sent it? Who was watching them? He looked at the dark windows of the mansion. "I hope it is worth it," Tyrell whispered to the darkness. "I hope $47 million is enough to buy back my soul." He turned off the light, leaving himself in the dark with the woman who had ruined his life, preparing to sign a deal with the devil he didn't know. The sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky over the Hamptons in bruised shades of purple and blood red. It was fitting weather for an execution. Inside the Vance estate, the silence of the last 3 months was replaced by the controlled chaos of preparation. But this was not the chaotic energy of Tyrell's tacky parties with loud DJs and cheap alcohol. This was the quiet, terrifying precision of old money. A team of 20 caterers moved through the halls like silent ghosts, carrying silver trays and crystal glasses. Florists were arranging massive displays of white lilies and black orchids in the foyer. The scent was intoxicating, heavy and sweet, smelling like a wedding and a funeral all at once. I stood in the master suite, a room I had been forbidden to enter by my own disguise for 90 days. I looked at the gray polyester uniform lying in a crumpled heap on the floor. It looked like a shed skin, the remains of a creature I used to be. For 3 months, Lee, the housekeeper, had bowed her head. She had said, "Yes, sir," and "Right away, madam." She had taken the insults, the spilled drinks, and the invisible cuts to her pride. But Lee was dead now. She had served her purpose. I walked into the bathroom and turned on the shower. I scrubbed my skin until it was raw, washing away the smell of cleaning products, the smell of servitude, and the lingering scent of Tyrell's betrayal. I washed the dark dye out of my hair, revealing the natural texture, though I kept the fierce shortcut. It suited the woman I had become. When I stepped out wrapped in a plush robe that cost more than my old car, Evelyn was waiting for me in the dressing room. She was not alone. She had brought a team, a makeup artist, a hairstylist, and a tailor. They did not speak to me as a client. They worked on me as if they were preparing a warrior for battle. The dress hung on a mannequin in the corner. It was not white. I was done with innocence. It was black. Midnight black velvet that seemed to absorb the light. It was strapless, with a plunging neckline and a slit that ran up to my thigh. It was a dress that commanded attention, a dress that said, "I own this room and everyone in it." I stepped into it. The fabric was cool and heavy against my skin. The tailor made a few final adjustments, ensuring it fit like a second skin. The makeup artist painted my lips a deep blood red, sharp eyeliner, contoured cheekbones. Then Evelyn stepped forward. She was holding a black velvet box. "This belonged to Otis's mother," she said softly. "He wanted you to wear it tonight." She opened the box. Inside lay a necklace that made me gasp. It was a cascade of diamonds interwoven with rare black opals. It was heavy, ancient, and priceless. Evelyn fastened it around my neck. The cold stones settled against my collarbone. I looked in the floor-to-length mirror. The woman staring back at me was a stranger. She was tall. She was terrifying. She radiated a cold, dark power. There was no trace of the crying girl in the subway station. There was no trace of the submissive maid. "Are you ready?" Evelyn asked. I touched the diamonds at my throat. I thought about the text message I sent Tyrell last night. I thought about the look on his face when he reads the merger agreement I had drafted. "I am not just ready, Evelyn," I said, my voice low and steady. "I am hungry." Downstairs, the grandfather clock chimed 7 times. The sound echoed through the massive house. "They are here," Evelyn said. I nodded. "Let them wait. Let them sweat." I walked to the window and looked down at the driveway. Tyrell's black SUV pulled up. It looked small and insignificant against the backdrop of my estate. The driver's door opened and Tyrell stepped out. He was wearing a tuxedo, but he looked pale. Dark circles rimmed his eyes. He hadn't slept. The seed of doubt I planted was growing roots in his brain. Caroline stepped out from the passenger side. She was wearing a gold sequined dress that was too tight and too loud. She looked around nervously, clutching her purse. She didn't look like a winner tonight. She looked like a survivor clinging to a life raft. I watched them walk up the stone steps. I watched Tyrell hesitate before ringing the bell. He was afraid. Good. I signaled to the security team through my earpiece. Let them in. I stayed upstairs listening. I wanted to hear them one last time before I ended them. The heavy front door opened. I heard their footsteps on the marble foyer. "Hello," Tyrell's voice called out. It cracked slightly. "Hello, Mr. Sterling? Mr. Chairman?" Silence answered him. The house was dimly lit, candles flickering along the walls. The string quartet began to play a low, haunting melody in the ballroom, but there was no one there to greet them. "This is creepy," Caroline whispered. Her voice carried up the stairs. "Where is everyone? Where is the staff?" Tyrell cleared his throat. "Maybe they are in the dining room." They walked further in. I could hear the click of Caroline's heels. "Hey," Tyrell said louder this time. "Lee! Lee, are you here?" I smiled. He was looking for his safety blanket. He was looking for the maid he could order around the one person in this house he felt superior to. "Where is that useless girl?" Caroline hissed. "She should be here to take our coats. I told you she was incompetent. We arrive for the most important meeting of our lives, and the help is missing." "I bet she is sleeping in the kitchen," Tyrell muttered. "Or maybe she stole something else and ran off." They moved into the center of the foyer, directly under the massive crystal chandelier. They spun around looking for a servant, looking for a host, looking for anyone to validate their existence. "Is this a joke?" Caroline said, her voice rising in panic. "Tyrell, I don't like this. Why is it so quiet? Why is there music but no people?" "Relax," Tyrell said, though he sounded anything but relaxed. "It is a test. The chairman likes theatrics. Remember what Mr. Sterling said. He values power. He is probably watching us right now." He was right. I was watching. I walked out of the master suite and stood at the top of the grand staircase. I was hidden in the shadows of the landing, just out of their line of sight. Lee Tyrell shouted again, frustration creeping into his tone. "Get out here! We need drinks!" I took a deep breath. I channeled every ounce of pain, every tear, every cold night in the subway. I let it harden into a weapon. I stepped forward into the light. "I am afraid Lee is unavailable," I said, my voice projecting clearly through the hall. "She has been relieved of her duties." Tyrell and Caroline froze. They whipped their heads up, squinting against the light of the chandelier. "Who is that?" Caroline whispered. "Is that the chairman's wife?" Tyrell stepped forward, shielding his eyes. "Excuse me, madam. We didn't see you. We are looking for the chairman. And our housekeeper seems to be missing." I began to descend the stairs. Slowly. One step at a time. The black velvet of my dress trailed behind me like a shadow. The diamonds around my neck caught the candlelight flashing with fire. I reached the middle landing and stopped. "You are not looking for the chairman, Tyrell," I said. You are looking for a savior, but I am afraid you came to the wrong house. Tyrell's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He stared at me. He looked at the short hair. He looked at the cheekbones. He looked at the eyes. The recognition hit him like a physical blow. He staggered back, grabbing Caroline's arm for support. No, he whispered. No. That is impossible. Caroline squinted, leaning forward. Who is it, Tyrell? Do you know her? Tyrell couldn't speak. He was shaking his head violently, denying the reality that was standing 10 feet above him. Hello, husband, I said. Caroline screamed. It was a short, sharp sound of pure horror. She covered her mouth with her hands. Aaliyah, she gasped. I smiled. It was the coldest smile I had ever worn. Welcome to my home, I said. Please, do not get comfortable. You won't be staying long. The silence in the grand foyer was absolute. It was not the peaceful silence of a library, but the heavy, suffocating silence of a courtroom right before the verdict is read. Tyrell and Caroline stood huddled together near the entrance, looking small and insignificant beneath the towering ceilings of the Vance estate. They were still trembling from the shock of seeing my face at the top of the stairs, but their brains were rejecting the reality. They were trying to rationalize it. They were whispering frantically to each other, trying to convince themselves that I was an imposter, a twin, or perhaps a hallucination brought on by stress. It cannot be her, Caroline hissed, her voice echoing too loudly in the empty space. Aaliyah is homeless. She is eating out of garbage cans. This is just a look-alike, a cruel joke. Tyrell wiped sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. You are right. It has to be a joke. The chairman is testing us. This is some kind of psychological game. I stood in the shadows of the landing listening to their delusion. It was pathetic. Even when staring the truth in the face, they chose to believe in a lie because the truth was too terrifying to accept. I signaled the control room with a small tap on my earpiece. It is time, I whispered. Suddenly, the massive crystal chandelier above their heads went dark. The wall sconces flickered and died. The entire mansion was plunged into pitch blackness. Caroline screamed, grabbing onto Tyrell's tuxedo jacket. Tyrell shouted, Hey, what is going on? Is this a power outage? For 10 seconds, I let them stand in the dark. I let them feel the disorientation. I let their heart rates spike. Fear is a powerful tool. It strips away the arrogance and leaves the raw, trembling human underneath. Then a single beam of light cut through the darkness. It was a spotlight, sharp and brilliant, focused directly on the top of the grand staircase. It did not hit me yet. It hit the empty space where I was about to step. A voice boomed over the hidden surround sound system. It was the deep, gravelly voice of Mr. Henderson playing the role of his life. Ladies and gentlemen, the voice announced, resonating off the marble walls like the voice of God. Please rise for the chairman of the board, the owner of this estate, and the sole heir to the Otis Vance fortune. Tyrell and Caroline looked up, their faces illuminated by the spill of the spotlight. They were paralyzed, their mouths hanging open. The voice continued, savoring every syllable. Ms. Aaliyah Brooks. I stepped into the light. The effect was instantaneous. I was no longer the girl in the gray polyester uniform. I was a vision of vengeance wrapped in midnight velvet. The black dress hugged my body, the slit revealing just enough leg to show confidence, not desperation. The diamond and black opal necklace around my throat blazed under the spotlight, a collar of fire and ice. I did not smile. My face was a mask of cold, imperious beauty. I began to descend. Click, click, click. My heels on the marble stairs were the only sound in the room. I walked slowly. I wanted them to see every inch of the transformation. I wanted them to see the hair they had mocked, now styled to perfection. I wanted them to see the skin they had called dirty, now glowing with health and power. Tyrell was holding a glass of champagne he had plucked from a passing tray earlier. As I took the third step, his hand went limp. The crystal flute slipped from his fingers. It hit the floor with a shattering crash that sounded like a gunshot. Champagne sprayed over his polished shoes and Caroline's gold dress, but neither of them flinched. They were frozen in a state of catatonic shock. Caroline looked like she was having a stroke. Her eyes were bulging, her expertly applied makeup unable to hide the drain of color from her face. She looked from me to the portrait of Uncle Otis on the wall, and the connection finally snapped into place. The chin, the eyes, the family resemblance she had been too blind to see because she was too busy looking down on me. I reached the bottom of the stairs. I did not stop. I walked straight toward them. The spotlight followed me, keeping me in a halo of brilliance while leaving them on the edge of the darkness. I stopped 2 feet in front of Caroline. I was taller than her in my heels. For the first time in my life, I looked down on her, not just physically, but spiritually. I tilted my head slightly, studying her face, like one would study a bacteria under a microscope. "Hello, Caroline," I said. My voice was smooth, rich, and utterly calm. She made a strangling noise in her throat. A. You seem pale," I observed, stepping into her personal space. She shrank back, terrified that I might touch her. "You look like you need a drink." I paused, letting the silence stretch until it was painful. "How about some orange juice?" I asked, a small, cruel smile touching my lips. "Freshly squeezed. Light ice. Or would you prefer to pour it on the rug again?" Caroline let out a whimper. Her knees buckled and she grabbed Tyrell's arm to keep from collapsing. The reference to the orange juice was the final confirmation. There was no twin. There was no look-alike. The woman she had treated like a slave, the woman she had tried to frame for theft, the woman she had insulted to her face for 3 months was standing before her as the most powerful person in her world. I turned my gaze to Tyrell. He was shaking. His mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. He looked at the diamonds around my neck. He looked at the opulent foyer. He looked at the symbol of Crown Holdings etched into the marble floor. His brain was misfiring. He was a narcissist, and narcissists have a defense mechanism that is almost admirable in its insanity. When faced with total destruction, they try to rewrite the narrative to make themselves the hero. He blinked rapidly. A manic, desperate light entered his eyes. He didn't see an executioner. He saw a bank account. He saw $47 million. He saw a merger that was already signed in his head. "Aaliyah," he stammered, his voice cracking. "Baby, it is you." He took a step forward, his arms opening instinctively as if he expected a hug. "It is really you." He laughed, a high-pitched, hysterical sound. "You are the heir. You are the chairman." He looked at Caroline, then back at me, a wide, terrifying grin spreading across his face. "Oh my God. Do you realize what this means? You played us. You really played us. But it is okay. It is brilliant, actually." He reached out to grab my hand. I didn't move. I didn't recoil. I just watched him with the detachment of a statue. "We are rich," Tyrell shouted, looking at Caroline. "Wifey, did you hear me? We are rich. Aaliyah is the owner. She is the one investing. The money stays in the family." He turned back to me, his eyes wet with tears of greed. "I knew it. I knew you were special, Aaliyah. That is why I pushed you so hard. That is why I was tough on you, to prepare you for this. We are a team, baby. You and me. Brooks Real Estate and Crown Holdings. We are going to rule this city." He actually believed it. He actually believed that after starving me, divorcing me, and humiliating me, he could just smile and step back into the role of the husband because I had money. I looked at his outstretched hand. I looked at the wedding ring tan line on his finger where he had taken off his band months ago. I laughed. It was a soft laugh at first, then it grew louder. It echoed off the walls. It was the laugh of someone who had seen the punchline of a very long, very dark joke. Tyrell laughed with me, relief flooding his face. He thought I was laughing with him. He thought he was safe. "Oh, Tyrell," I said, wiping a tear of mirth from my eye. "You really are fascinating. You think this is a reunion? I stopped laughing abruptly. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. This is not a reunion, Tyrell, I whispered, leaning in so close I could smell the cheap champagne on his breath. This is a foreclosure. Tyrell stood there with his hand extended, a smile plastered on his face that was equal parts desperation and delusion. He looked like a man drowning who had just spotted a lifeboat, not realizing the lifeboat was actually a shark. He really thought that money could erase history. He thought that a few zeros in a bank account could wash away the nights I spent sleeping on a subway floor. He thought we were partners again. I looked at him. I let the silence stretch until it was physically painful. Then I took a half step back, putting a precise distance between us. I repeated, testing the word like it was a piece of rotten fruit. Yes, baby, Tyrell said, his eyes darting to the diamond necklace at my throat. You and me. We built Brooks Real Estate together. You were always the silent partner. Now you are the loud partner, the rich partner. We can merge the assets. We can rule the Hamptons. I let out a short, sharp laugh. It was a cold sound that bounced off the marble walls. There is no we, Tyrell. There hasn't been a we since you tricked me into signing a prenup you knew I didn't read. There hasn't been a we since you threw my clothes in a trash bag. And there is certainly no we now. Tyrell's smile faltered. But Aaliyah, the merger. You invited us here to sign the deal. I nodded slowly. You are right. I did invite you here to close a deal. But I think you misunderstood the nature of the transaction. Please, take a seat. I gestured to the two small velvet chairs in the center of the foyer. They looked like interrogation chairs under the spotlight. Tyrell and Caroline sat down confused, their knees touching. I pulled a small silver remote from the pocket of my dress. Mr. Sterling, I called out to the shadows, lower the screen. A massive projection screen descended from the ceiling, blocking the view of the grand staircase. Tyrell straightened his tie. He was expecting to see his company logo. He was expecting to see a welcome banner. I clicked the remote. The screen flared to life. It was not a logo, it was a spreadsheet. A very specific, very red spreadsheet. Tyrell squinted. That looks like my internal ledger. It is, I said, walking around them like a prosecutor in a courtroom. This is the true financial state of Brooks Real Estate as of this morning. You are not just overextended, Tyrell. You are insolvent. You have leveraged every property you own 3 times over. You are paying loan sharks in New Jersey to cover the interest on your bank loans. You are technically bankrupt. Tyrell jumped up. Where did you get that? That is private corporate data. I ignored him and clicked the remote again. The next slide appeared. It was a photo. A grainy black and white photo taken with a night vision lens. It showed 2 people standing near a hedge. One was a man in a baseball cap. The other was a woman in a trench coat handing him a thick envelope. Caroline gasped. Her hands flew to her mouth. Tyrell looked at the screen, then at Caroline. Wait. That is Julian Thorne, my competitor. And that is you, Caroline. I clicked the remote again. A video file began to play. The audio was crystal clear. Just give me the money, Caroline's voice echoed through the foyer. I don't care what happens to Tyrell, he is a loser. The ship is going down, and I am not going to drown with him. The silence that followed was deafening. Tyrell turned to look at his wife. His face was a mask of pure betrayal. You sold me out, he whispered. You sold my client list to Julian. I did what I had to do, Caroline screamed, jumping up. You are broke, Tyrell. Look at the screen. You are finished. I clicked the remote one last time. The final slide appeared. It was a bank transfer document. Ladies and gentlemen, please focus, I said, commanding the room. While you two were busy betraying each other, I was busy doing business. You see, Tyrell banks get very nervous when they see ledgers like yours. They are desperate to offload bad debt. They will sell it to anyone who has cash and a willingness to take a risk. I walked up to Tyrell, standing so close I could see the sweat beading on his upper lip. I didn't invest in your company, Tyrell. I bought your debt, every single cent of it. I bought your bank loans. I bought your private loans. I even bought the promissory note you signed with the guys in Jersey. Tyrell's knees gave out. He collapsed back into the chair. You own my debt, he stammered. I own you, I corrected. I am your sole creditor. And looking at these financials and the fact that your proprietary secrets have just been sold to a competitor by your wife, I have decided to call in the loan. I leaned in, my voice dropping to a whisper that sounded like a thunderclap. I am exercising the immediate repayment clause. You owe me $12 million, Tyrell, and I want it now. But I don't have it, Tyrell cried, tears streaming down his face. You know I don't have it. I know, I said, straightening up and smoothing my dress. And since you cannot pay, I am initiating asset seizure. I am taking your car. I am taking your apartment. I am taking the watch on your wrist. I am taking everything right down to the gold fillings in your teeth if I have to. Caroline tried to inch toward the door. I had nothing to do with this, she whimpered. This is his debt. I am leaving. Not so fast, sister-in-law, I said, pointing the remote at her like a weapon. I clicked play on a new audio file. It was Caroline's voice again. I took her identity. I used her social security number to open those credit cards. I racked up the bills. Caroline froze. She looked at Tyrell, who was looking at her with murder in his eyes. You admitted to identity theft and fraud, I said. And you did it on my property while being recorded by my security system. Suddenly, the heavy oak doors of the mansion burst open, but it wasn't guests arriving for dinner. Blue and red lights flashed against the foyer walls, blinding and chaotic. Uniformed officers swarmed into the room, their boots heavy on the marble floor. Behind them walked two men in suits with badges hanging from their necks. The FBI. Tyrell Brooks and Caroline Vance, an agent, shouted, his voice booming. Put your hands in the air. Tyrell looked at the police, then at me. He looked shattered. The reality of his life was crumbling around him in real time. Aaliyah, please, he begged, raising his shaking hands. You can stop this. We were married. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had left me to freeze in the winter. You are right, Tyrell, I said, turning my back on him as the officers moved in with handcuffs. We were married, and that was the biggest mistake of my life. But don't worry, I fixed it. I walked toward the staircase as the officers slammed Tyrell against the wall. Caroline was screaming, kicking as they cuffed her. Ms. Brooks, the agent, called out to me. Do you want to make a statement? I paused on the first step, looking back at the chaotic scene. Tyrell was weeping. Caroline was cursing. It was the ugliest, most beautiful thing I had ever seen. No, I said, signaling for the music to restart. My statement is in the slide deck. Take them away. I climbed the stairs, the sound of their Miranda rights being read fading behind me like a bad dream. I didn't look back. I had a company to run. And for the first time in forever, I had a peaceful night of sleep ahead of me. The flashing lights of the police cruisers outside danced through the open front doors, painting the marble foyer in chaotic strokes of red and blue. It was the perfect lighting for the finale of a tragedy. Caroline Vance, the woman who had terrorized me, ridiculed me, and tried to frame me, was currently being pressed against the wall by two federal agents. The sound of cuffs ratcheting tight around her wrists was the sweetest music I had ever heard, better than any symphony Uncle Otis could have played. She was not going quietly. She was thrashing, kicking, and screaming with the feral desperation of a trapped animal. Her gold-sequined dress, which she had worn to outshine everyone, was now twisted and hiking up her legs as she fought. Get your hands off me! Caroline shrieked, her voice cracking. Do you know who I am? This is a mistake. I am a victim here. Tyrell made me do it. It was his idea. He is the fraudster. She turned her head, her eyes locking onto Tyrell, who was standing frozen near the stairs. Tell them, Tyrell, she screamed. Tell them you cooked the books. Tell them I was just a terrified wife doing what she was told. The agents didn't care about her lies. They spun her around and began to march her toward the door. But I wasn't done with her yet. I raised my hand, signaling to the head of my security team standing by the entrance. "Open the gates," I said calmly. "Let the press in." The security guard nodded and spoke into his radio. A moment later, a swarm of photographers and reporters who had been tipped off about a high-profile arrest at the Vance estate surged up the driveway. As the agents dragged Caroline out onto the porch, a wall of blinding white camera flashes erupted. Caroline tried to hide her face, but with her hands cuffed behind her back, she was exposed. The click and whir of the cameras captured every second of her humiliation. The mascara running down her cheeks, the terror in her eyes, the complete and total destruction of the image she had spent her entire life curating. I watched from the doorway, feeling a cold, hard satisfaction settled in my chest. She wanted to be famous. She wanted to be on the front page. Now she would be. "Goodbye, Caroline," I whispered. "Enjoy the prison food. I hear the orange juice is from concentrate." The agents shoved her into the back of a black SUV, and just like that, the architect of my misery was gone. I turned back to the room. The silence rushed back in, leaving only the sound of heavy breathing. Tyrell was the only one left. He wasn't in handcuffs yet, though his time was coming. The FBI agents were busy seizing his laptop and files from the library. For this moment, he was alone with me. He looked small. The tuxedo that had looked so sharp an hour ago now seemed to hang off his frame. He was sweating profusely, his skin gray and clammy. He looked at the empty space where his wife had just been. Then he looked at me. "Aaliyah," he croaked. I walked slowly down the remaining steps until I was standing right in front of him. I didn't look at him with anger. Anger implies passion. I looked at him with the indifference one might show a dead insect. I reached into the small velvet purse attached to my wrist. My fingers brushed against a cold metal object. I pulled it out. It was a single quarter, scratched dull and practically worthless. I held it up to the light, letting him see it. "Do you know what this is, Tyrell?" I asked. He stared at the coin, confused and terrified. It is a quarter." "No," I said. "This is your net worth." I flicked the coin at him. It hit the silk lapel of his tuxedo with a pathetic ping and bounced onto the marble floor, rolling away into the shadows. Actually, I corrected myself. That is generous. Considering the $12 million of debt I now own, you are worth significantly less than that coin. But you can keep it. Consider it a severance package. Tyrell's face crumpled. The reality of his situation finally pierced through his narcissism. He wasn't just broke. He was obliterated. He had no wife, no company, no home, and no future. He did the only thing a coward knows how to do. He dropped to his knees. He grabbed the hem of my black velvet dress, burying his face in the fabric. "Aaliyah, please," he sobbed, his shoulders shaking. "Do not do this. I am begging you. We were in love once. Remember our honeymoon? Remember the apartment on 4th Street? I was lost, baby. Caroline manipulated me. She twisted my mind. I never stopped loving you. I just got confused." I looked down at the top of his head. I felt nothing. No pity, no sadness, just a mild irritation that he was wrinkling my dress. "Get up," I said coldly. "You are embarrassing yourself." "I can fix this," Tyrell blubbered, looking up at me with red, swollen eyes. "We can fix this. I can run the company for you. I know the business. Let me stay. Let me prove myself. I will sleep in the guest house. I will be your assistant. I will do anything. Just don't throw me out on the street. I have nowhere to go." "You have nowhere to go," I repeated, a dangerous edge entering my voice. That is ironic. Because I remember a night not too long ago when I had nowhere to go. I remember begging you for a coat and you gave me a trash bag. That was... Caroline, Tyrell cried. "It was you, Tyrell," I snapped, stepping back and ripping my dress from his grip. "You stood there and watched. You watched the security guard throw me in the mud. You watched me starve." I looked toward the hallway that led to the kitchen. "Joe," I called out. A moment later, the double doors opened. A man walked out. But it wasn't the dirty, matted homeless man from the subway station. It was a gentleman. He was freshly showered, his silver hair neatly trimmed and combed back. He was wearing a black suit that fit him perfectly with a crisp white shirt and a silk tie. He stood tall, his eyes clear and sharp. Tyrell squinted, trying to focus through his tears. Who is that? I walked over to Joe and placed a hand on his shoulder. This is Mr. Joe, I said. You might know him as Crazy Joe from the subway station, the man you stepped over on your way to work every morning. Tyrell's jaw dropped. That bum, the guy who talks to birds. That man, I interrupted, my voice, sharp as a razor, shared his only meal with me when my own husband left me to die. He gave me half a stale sandwich when he had nothing else. He showed more humanity in 5 minutes than you have shown in your entire life. I looked at Joe and smiled warmly. Mr. Joe is no longer homeless. He is the new head of household for the Vance estate. He will manage the staff, the grounds, and the security. He has a suite in the East Wing, a salary that dwarfs what your company made last year, and something you will never have again. My respect. I turned back to Tyrell, pointing a finger at him. You are not fit to shine his shoes, Tyrell. You are not fit to breathe the same air as him. He is a king in this house. And you are nothing. Tyrell looked from me to Joe, the shame burning his face. He realized then that he hadn't just lost money. He had lost the moral war. He was smaller than the smallest man he knew. Mr. Joe, I said softly, would you please escort this trespasser off the property? Joe nodded, his face stern. With pleasure, Ms. Brooks. Joe stepped forward. He didn't need to shout. He simply pointed to the door. Time to go, son. Joe said, his voice deep and gravelly. Do not make me call the dogs. Tyrell scrambled to his feet. He looked at me one last time, searching for a shred of the woman who used to love him. But she wasn't there. She had burned up in the cold of winter. Aaliyah, he whispered. Get out! I screamed, the sound echoing off the rafters. Get out of my house. Tyrell flinched as if I had hit him. He turned and ran. He ran past Joe, ran through the foyer, and burst out the front door into the night. I walked to the doorway and watched him go. He stumbled down the long driveway, a tiny dark figure disappearing into the vast empty darkness of the Hamptons. He had no car. He had no money. He had only a quarter in his pocket and a lifetime of regret ahead of him. I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was Evelyn. It is done, she said quietly. I took a deep breath of the cool night air. It tasted sweet. It tasted like victory. Yes, I said, turning back to the warmth of my home. It is finally done. Close the door, Joe. We have a lot of work to do. 6 months have passed since the night the blue and red lights of the police cruisers painted the walls of my estate. The Hamptons are beautiful in the late summer. The air loses that oppressive humidity and turns crisp, smelling of salt and drying hydrangeas. I stood on the limestone balcony of the master bedroom, holding a cup of tea, looking out at the Atlantic Ocean. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that costs millions of dollars to acquire. There were no screaming in-laws, no deceitful husbands, no desperate scrambling for approval, just the rhythmic crashing of the waves against the shore. I put down my tea and checked my watch. It was a Cartier tank, a gift I bought for myself to celebrate the opening of the Otis Vance Foundation. Today was a big day. We were cutting the ribbon on a new community center in the Bronx, dedicated to helping women rebuild their lives after financial abuse. It was the legacy Uncle Otis would have wanted. He didn't just leave me money, he left me a mission. But before I left for the city, I allowed myself a moment to check in on the ghosts of my past. It was a bad habit, I knew, but sometimes you have to look at the wreckage to appreciate how far you have sailed. I opened my iPad and pulled up the report from my private investigator. He sent me a monthly update, mostly to ensure that Tyrell and Caroline were not plotting anything new. I scrolled to the first photo. It was grainy, taken from a distance in a parking lot in Queens. Tyrell. He looked older. He had lost weight, and not in a good way. His hair was thinning, and that arrogant chest-out posture he used to have was gone, replaced by a permanent slump of defeat. He was wearing a neon yellow jumpsuit covered in grease and soap suds. He was scrubbing the rims of a white Mercedes G-Wagon. I zoomed in on his face. He looked miserable. He looked broken. The report noted that he was currently employed at Sparkle Shine Auto Wash. He was making minimum wage plus tips. He lived in a shared basement apartment with 3 other men. His credit score was destroyed. His reputation in the real estate world was radioactive. No one would hire a man who had been exposed publicly for massive fraud and debt. So he was back to where he started. Only this time he didn't have a loyal wife to clip coupons for him. He was washing the very cars he used to pretend to own. I swiped to the next page. Caroline. There were no photos of her, only a scan of a visitation log. She was currently serving a 3-year sentence at a minimum security federal prison in Connecticut for identity theft, fraud, and conspiracy. The notes said she had lost her appeal. Her husband, Tyrell's brother, had divorced her immediately after the arrest to save his own reputation. She was alone. She was working in the prison laundry folding sheets for 12 cents an hour. The woman who screamed if her orange juice wasn't fresh was now drinking tap water and wearing a uniform that scratched. I turned off the iPad. I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel sad. I just felt balanced. The scales of the universe had tipped wildly against me, and I had simply forced them back into alignment. I walked downstairs. Joe was waiting for me in the foyer. He looked dashing in his suit, checking the schedule on his phone. "The car is ready, Ms. Brooks," Joe said, opening the front door. "We have a full schedule today. The mayor wants to shake your hand at the opening." "Thank you, Joe," I said. I walked out into the sunlight. The Rolls-Royce was gleaming in the driveway. I paused for a second, looking at the spot where Tyrell had stood when I threw that quarter at him. The quarter was gone, probably swept away by the gardeners, just like Tyrell. I climbed into the back seat as the car pulled away, driving through the iron gates that now protected my peace. I looked back at the house one last time. It wasn't a fortress anymore. It was a home. I thought about the girl who slept in the subway station. I thought about the girl who ate a sandwich from a trash can. I thought about the girl who let a man tell her she was worthless for 5 years. She was gone, but I would never forget her. She was the fire that forged me. I rolled down the window, letting the wind whip through my short hair. I took a deep breath of freedom. "They thought they buried me," I whispered to the wind, a smile spreading across my face. "They threw me in the dirt and piled the mud on top of me. They thought that was the end, but they forgot one very important thing about the earth." I closed my eyes, feeling the warmth of the sun on my face. They forgot that I was a seed, and all that dirt they threw on me, all that rain of money and tears, it didn't kill me. It just gave me everything I needed to grow into a forest they can never cut down. This story serves as a powerful reminder that your worth is never defined by how others treat you, but by how you choose to stand up for yourself. Aaliyah's journey from homelessness to the boardroom proves that rock bottom can be the solid foundation on which you build a new life. We often fear losing people, but sometimes the greatest gain is the dead weight we leave behind. Financial independence is freedom, but self-respect is the true empire. Never let anyone convince you that you are finished when you are actually just beginning your most important chapter. If you have ever had to rebuild your life from scratch, or if you are currently fighting a battle no one else can see, hit the like button and subscribe. Share this story with a friend who needs to be reminded of their own power. And tell me in the comments, what is the one thing you would do if you suddenly inherited a fortune and the chance to settle the score? Remember, the best revenge is not destroying your enemies, it is living a life so beautiful that they become irrelevant.